Alrighty then. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 143. I'm your host, Ponyo Basa. You're trying to get in the middle of the camera here. And this is my beverage. Get that in the middle, right? Kind of right in there. So, we've got quite a few questions. And those of you who are not mathematicians may have jumped to the conclusion that 143 is a prime number, but it is not a prime number because it is, in fact, 11 times 13. So it may be a while before we get to another prime number Q&A. And I should just dive right into this because we got lots of questions. And I'm a little bit tired today, partly because I got up this early afternoon, late morning. I don't remember exactly when I got up. Rested a little bit, had a couple cups of coffee, and then immediately went out and started mowing lawns and digging holes. We planted a paper birch tree in the backyard today and just started doing chores before I even ate anything. And now I am somewhat fatigued. Also, when I finally did eat something, it included bacon, which may have lowered my vibrational rate somewhat. So please bear that in mind. If I answer a question incorrectly or some such, blame the bacon. And now let's just commence to answering questions here. And the first question is from Michael. And we got a lot of long questions this time. We got numerous essay questions in this Q&A for some reason, probably random chance. At least statistically, we can just call it random chance. Anyway, Michael says, I've been listening to your excellent Q&As for some time. As a Buddhist, there's an interesting dichotomy that no one I have asked can resolve. So perhaps you would like to. In the suttas, there is frequent reference to incalculable eons. And I really need to wipe these glasses. When I was weed eating today, it was like all kinds of derbises flying up. It's like pieces of mutilated dandelions and soil. This kind of stuff is flying up and hitting me just pretty much all over my body. I apologize to Michael for interrupting myself in the middle of reading his question. I'll just start again. Michael says, I've been listening to your excellent Q&As for some time. As a Buddhist, there's an interesting dichotomy that no one I have asked can resolve, so perhaps you would like to. In the suttas, there is frequent reference to incalculable eons. In regard to the time that sentient beings have been wandering in samsara, the Buddha is careful to say incalculable and not to say that previous lives are infinite. This is because he knew that by saying infinite, his detractors at the time would have pointed out that we all would have had to achieve liberation already, since we could not have lived infinite lives and not have achieved liberation. The only way that past lives could be infinite and yet to explain why we still remain in bondage is that liberation is reversible. That somehow we attain liberation and are enticed back into samsara over and over again. This would be a sort of Buddhist heresy, as one of the qualities of liberation is that it is taught to be non-reversible. So to avoid these logical snares, the Buddha did not say that past lives are infinite. However, by not saying that previous lives are infinite, then this implies that there is a beginning point. Even if Buddha's omniscience was unable to pinpoint it, this in turn implies one of two possibilities. One, our personal experience of samsara may have started when the conscious element separated from the Godhead as taught in Vedanta, and two, the conscious element was created by some sort of creator divinity. In either case, whether past lives are infinite or finite, there are serious difficulties that I'm unable to reconcile with Buddhist doctrine because the dichotomy seems a little prickly. I didn't wish to post it on a public forum and perhaps cast doubt into the minds of practicing Buddhists, but you are clearly steady and well seasoned, so to speak, so by asking this question directly, I sincerely hope that it doesn't pose any problems for you. Personally, I know that rebirth is as natural as apple pie and supported by a lot of evidence. Dr. Ian Stevenson's, for example. In any case, I'd I'd be very grateful if you could give me your thoughts when your time allows. Best wishes, and thank you for your insightful videos. Okay, actually, while reading this, I recall that this is may not have been intended for a Q&A video. I think he was asking me personally because he thought it was kind of an embarrassing question, like for devout Buddhists or something. So this was like a personal message, but it's fair game. You know, I'm not particularly squeamish with regard to questions that are questioning like basic Buddhism. And there's a lot to unpack here. Michael does make some assumptions that I consider to be unwarranted. For example, let's see, interesting dichotomy. A dichotomy means a choice between two possibilities, and I don't really see the dichotomy here, other than, let's see here. In the suttas, there's frequent reference to incalculable eons. In regard to the time that sentient beings have been wandering, you see, the Buddha is careful to say incalculable and not say previous lives are infinite. This is because he knew that by saying infinite, his detractors at the time would have pointed out they all would have had to achieve liberation already. Well, Michael here is second guessing the psychology of a Sammasambuddha. Michael is assuming that he knows why the Buddha said incalculable eons, but I doubt that his explanation is the correct one. Let's see. This is because he knew that by saying infinite, his detractors at the time would have pointed out that we all would have had to achieve liberation already. But, I mean, most of his detractors went along with pretty much the same idea. Like the Brahmins, they were pretty much getting on board the reincarnation train by the time of the Buddha. The Jains also. The Ajivakas thought that you had a limited number of lives, so there would have to have been a first one. So I'm not exactly sure where the Ajivakas thought that the first life came from. I'm not sure about that. It would have been a very crude, primitive kind of life, possibly arising organically as a kind of crystal or plant, some primitive like algae or something. I'm not sure about that. Well, let's continue picking through this. Let's see. The only way that past lives could be infinite, and yet to explain why well, getting back to this part, his detractors would say we would have all to achieve liberation already. Not really, because in ancient India, there wasn't really advanced logic or mathematics, that kind of thing. And a lot of the people were going with the same assumptions, that samsara is beginningless. And it may be that the Buddha just said incalculable eons, just incalculable, just because he wasn't going to make an assertion one way or the other. Like in the Atthakavagga, I mean, the Buddha says, you know, do not make assertions. You're better off not making assertions. Like the origin of the world, he just refused to answer it, that sort of thing. So incalculable eon just means if there is a beginning, it is unknown. It's just way out there. It is beyond reckoning. So the only way that past lives could be infinite, and yet to explain why we still remain in bondage is that liberation is reversible, that is not the only possible explanation. For example, you could also have a first life. Like I just mentioned, the Ajivakas believed that you have a limited number of lives. When you get to, I can't remember what it is, it's like 184,000 or something like that. I can't remember now. You know, it's like there had to be a first one. And it could be that Buddhism could accept a similar point of view where the karmic stream is just starting off. And I've talked about this a few times in previous Q&As, that this one weird book that I read as a young monk called Seth Speaks, it's got two possible ways that you could have like new karmic streams added to the cosmos, added to samsara. One is that a cosmic stream can split. So you could have like this karmic, I just say cosmic stream, karma. You've got karma as a kind of momentum of mental states that could like diverge. There could be like a little branch splitting off. Then it's not Orthodox Buddhism, but it is a possibility that I don't know how a Buddhist could disprove it other than just appeals to authority. And another one is that another way of creating new beings is like in this book, Seth Speaks, he's talking about how in your dreams, you may dream about someone who never existed. You may dream, you just create some being in your dream, and then you have sort of brought this being into existence, and they continue to live this shadowy, wispy semi-existence outside of your dream. You've just kind of, they've got like this shadowy dream realm kind of a thing that they're living in, and it's just, they start their evolution into more and more concrete, substantial, more conscious kind of beings. So the idea that you can become unenlightened again after you become enlightened. I mean, even the Atthakavagga, which is like the largest chunk of really primordial, archaic kind of Buddhism, in my opinion, denies that once you become enlightened, you can become unenlightened again. So let's see here. So to avoid these logical snares, the Buddha did not say that past lives are infinite. However, by not saying that previous lives are infinite, then this implies that there is a beginning point. Yeah, that's possible. Even if the Buddha's omniscience was unable to pinpoint it, well, he wouldn't have been omniscient if he couldn't have pinpointed it. If he was really omniscient and there was a beginning, then he would have, if he wanted to know what the beginning was, he probably would have known it. But the Buddha's omniscience is itself kind of debatable, I think. So this in turn implies one of two possibilities, and I consider this to be a false dichotomy. These two possibilities are not comprehensive. So our personal experience of samsara may have started when the conscious element separated from the Godhead, and then the conscious element was created by some sort of creator divinity. So Michael here, that is his name, right? Let's scroll up here. Yeah, Michael here says the only two possibilities of explaining where beings come from is capital G God. Both of them. The only two alternatives are there is a God, which I just don't see it, and I'm not buying it. For example, the two possibilities I just mentioned, which I derived from a strange book called Seth Speaks, no mention of a capital G God. So let's see. In either case, whether past lives are infinite or finite, there are serious difficulties on unable to reconcile with Buddhist doctrine because the dichotomy seems a little prickly. And I'm not even sure what the dichotomy is, whether it's just the dichotomy of infinite past lives, in which case it's like I've pointed out with regard to the bad logic of taking bodhisattva vows. The bodhisattva vows, I vow to liberate all beings, when, there's already been an infinite amount of time, and we still have an infinite number of unenlightened suffering beings within a samsaric context. So it's just, taking these bodhisattva vows is pretty much just like imprisoning yourself in samsara forever, presumably. Let's see, but I think I might have just fallen off the track here. Let's see. The dichotomy seems a little prickly. I didn't wish to post in a public forum. Perhaps cast doubt into the minds of practicing Buddhists. Well, my explanation of where samsara comes from is, as always, the simile of the block of marble. So you've got like infinite formless consciousness that you can, that would be like the Vedantist God, except, when it's infinite and formless, it's just off the scale. It cannot be perceived. It's nirguna Brahman. It's not just God. It's inconceivable ultimate reality that is just off the scale. But let's get back to the block of marble. Sizeless, just because there's nothing around it to compare it with. So it's just call it sizeless for convenience. Within that block of marble is every single possible statue that could ever exist. An infinite number of impossible statues are in there too. And they're really there, in a sense. They're potentially, virtually, conditionally already there. An infinite number of these statues all superimposed upon each other. Just within this block of marble. And some of those statues become so complex that they become reflexive, they become self-aware and delusional, because it's an imperfect kind of awareness. So they think they're separate from everything else when ultimately they are not. So, I mean, if you want to call that like a Vedantist kind of a god, but the Buddhists have always been, or generally been, very careful about not reifying the absolute, because it is totally off the scale. Anything you can say about it is ultimately going to be invalid. So I guess I kind of answered the question. I'm not even sure. I mean, I don't even know if there's even a question mark in here, but he did request I respond to this. And I mean, I don't think that the only possible explanations for the existence of beings in this cosmos are God. But I mean, if you want to be really abstract in a kind of Vedantist manner, you want infinite formless consciousness that is just completely off the scale and cannot be perceived. You want to call that God, fine. Although Orthodox Buddhism avoids that by just not reifying the absolute, other than just calling it nirvana and not saying it's like this or it's like that. It's just the goal. It's the absolute, the absolute goal anyway. The end of delusion and suffering. So, yeah, I guess that's enough time. I mean, we do have kind of a lot of questions here. And there was a lot to pick through on this one. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rybalder. And Rybalder says, are you familiar with the recently discovered underground structures found via imaging below Giza pyramids? And yeah, I am familiar. I've watched a number of videos, mostly by like common sense archaeologists who are just pointing out that these Italian archaeologists, or whatever kind of Italians they were, are making really grandiose, pretty much unfounded claims. They've found some sort of something using a kind of imaging, like satellite imaging. And the satellite imaging can't even penetrate more than just a number of inches below the surface. But they've got some kind of gimmick where they're projecting down, and there's like these, they're like well shafts going down with some kind of spiral structures. And then there's like these huge blocks down below. Some people are calling it an underground city and so forth. And the common sense archaeologists are pointing out that most of that is underwater and has been underwater since prehistoric times. Just the water level is just, most of it would be underwater. Also, it would be a really bad place to make some kind of underground city or any kind of underground structures of that scale, simply because the limestone, the bedrock there, is full of fissures and cracks and irregularities and so forth. And it could be that this imaging is just finding underground like spaces. But I would be willing to make the statement that if there really are these structures that have been found via imaging, these huge like well shafts with the spiral things going down and the huge blocks underneath that were artificially made by humans or aliens or whatever, then I will eat a hat. I will eat a hat on this video or on an upcoming video, because I'm not going to sit around until they do that, because this video would become prohibitively long. However, even though somebody may choose the hat, I do get to choose the accompanying beverage. So with regard to these underground structures supposedly, allegedly found via satellite imaging that, like, in reality can't penetrate more than a number of inches below the surface, it's just, I mean, if you look at the original data, it's just kind of blurry, like staticky looking, it doesn't look like the stuff that they're saying it is. I mean, you could sort of use, like, what do you call it, matrixing, where you see what you want to see and you can kind of add in the missing details and so forth. But in all likelihood, I think it is just like noise in the imaging. And I don't think those structures are really there. So I think I'm just going to move on to Rybalder's second question, which is, have you been to the Bass Pro Shop Pyramid? No, I don't even know where it is. I don't think it's around here. There is some place that's not too far from here that I would like to go to sometime in my life. And that is, there's allegedly is a life-size replica of the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee. And I would like to see a life-size, not life-size, but a full-scale replica of the Parthenon. Now, like before, like the roof got blown off. I guess it was during the Napoleonic Wars or the Greek War for Independence or something, that the Parthenon was being used as an ammo dump. And it took a direct hit and it just blew the whole roof off of it. So I think the one in Nashville is probably in better shape. So yeah, the Bass Pro Shop Pyramid, I doubt that it would rival any of the great pyramids of Egypt. It's really not that famous. It's not on the list of wonders of the world or anything like that. I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Scaladin or Skuladin. And Scaladin or Skuladin says, out of everything you have ever read, who was the most exceptional at ad hominem attacks, or delivered an ad hominem attack that resonated with people so much that it defined their career? And then in his characteristic bullet point says, like Freud, who got away with calling everyone a motherfucker. Yeah, I don't think Freud was necessarily making an ad hominem attack against like pretty much the entire human race, or at least Europeans. And when I read this, I mean, I was trying to think of someone who's really good at ad hominem attacks. I mean, Donald Trump, he's pretty much of an expert at making ad hominem attacks. But the first person that came to mind was Arthur Schopenhauer, and his ad hominem attacks were mainly directed at one person, and that was Hegel. In fact, I've been told that Schopenhauer coined new words in the German language just for bashing Hegel. If you look up Hegel in the index to The World as Will and Representation by Schopenhauer, every single reference to Hegel is bashing the man. Schopenhauer just hated Hegel's guts, and he made no secret of that. So I don't think the ad hominem attacks really defined Trump's or Schopenhauer's careers, but both of them have indulged in ad hominem attacks, and they're both famous and both were relatively successful, I guess. So it wasn't a total mistake. And I'm just going to move on to Scaladin or Skuladin's second question, which is there a way to prove false or true ultimate value judgments? No, I mean, if it's a value judgment, then it's just like a personal choice. I don't know how you could prove false or true. I don't even know what an ultimate value judgment would be. I mean, once you get to the ultimate level, there's no more value judgments, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, his bullet point is, I prefer, I like, I wish. Yeah, I mean, how to prove false or true an ultimate value judgment? I think value judgments are just unprovable. I mean, unless it's the value judgment is, I like dark chocolate better than milk chocolate. I mean, how would you prove that? You know, I mean, even that wouldn't be an ultimate. Ultimately, I prefer dark chocolate to milk chocolate. Now, the question doesn't really make good sense to me. But value judgments, as a general rule, are ultimately, objectively, neither true nor false. They're just matters of preference and opinion. So, I guess I'll just move on to Skuladin's third question here, which is, would you kindly explain the effects of the Fukushima meltdown on the marine ecosystem of the Pacific Northwest? Well, the thing is, I was living in Burma when the Fukushima meltdown happened. And, I was a monk at the time. I was no longer really a professional fisheries biologist or anything. So I would just assume that there would be measurable amounts of radioactivity, still relatively low, not that you're going to have like mutant monster fish swimming around in Puget Sound, anything like that. But I would assume that there's, like slight increase in radioactivity on the Pacific coast of the Pacific Northwest as a result of the nuclear meltdown that happened in Japan back, I don't even remember what year it was. I was living in Burma at the time. So, yeah, it would just be a slight increase in ionizing radiation that might very slightly increase the mutation rate of organic life. But I don't think there was anything catastrophic that occurred. Maybe off the coast of Japan, you might have some like Bikini Atoll kind of stuff going on, but I don't think so on the coast of the Pacific Northwest. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Athena's Sigil. And Athena's Sigil says Star Trek or Star Wars or ... Babylon 5. I know you read science fiction. Gene Wolfe has been mentioned before, but do you follow mainstream cinematic and TV science fiction? Well, this is kind of two questions, isn't it? The first question is Star Trek or Star Wars or ... Babylon 5. I never saw a single episode of Babylon 5. I guess that's like a spin-off of Star Trek. But let's see, with regard to Star Trek or Star Wars, gosh, I think I'd prefer Star Trek, partly because it was somewhat better science fiction. I mean, I'm a science fiction snob, and so stuff that's not supposed to happen, like spaceships roaring through vacuum, like you see in Star Wars. I mean, it just kind of ruins it. Although the very first Star Wars episode had at least some relatively good-looking aliens, like in the bar scene, where it's like this rough bar with all these weird aliens there. Whereas Star Trek, there were very few Star Trek aliens that did not look like humans speaking English with an American accent. I mean, that's just pathetic. And TV science fiction, as a general rule, is lame. It's very difficult to find any kind of TV science fiction that really would satisfy a science fiction snob like myself. Maybe like something like cyberpunk, like some kind of cyberpunk dystopia movie. That wouldn't require space aliens and so forth that look like people. So, let's see here. I had this thought right when it was in the middle of that sentence, and I'm thinking, well, I'll get to the end of the sentence and I'll mention it. And now I've forgotten what it was. But yeah, TV science fiction is generally pretty lame. Movie science fiction is better, although recently any kind of science fiction movie, I mean, you're going to have to wade through all the like feminist propaganda, like some good movies like, what is it? Oh, it's got, what's his name in it? What's his name? Tom Cruise. What is it? It's a really good movie. Return to Tomorrow? No, something like that. I should look this stuff up. I should be prepared. But it has like good aliens in it. And the aliens don't look like people at all. They don't think like people. They don't talk English. But I mean, it's like the standard, the toughest, bravest, strongest person in the entire movie is a beautiful young woman. That's just almost unavoidable. The Matrix, the first Matrix movie, excellent science fiction, in my opinion, even though you've got like why the computers, why the machines have got humans using them as batteries and so forth. That's not good science, not good science fiction. The Walking Dead, I guess that would qualify as science fiction. As a science fiction snob, I'm just picking it apart. It's like these people are dead. You know, it's like their bodies shouldn't work, but yet they're like walking around. In some ways, they're as strong as they were before. Their body, in some ways, works as well as it did before, even though it's like not metabolizing. I mean, it's just the body is dead. It's rotting. So with regard to The Walking Dead, you just pretty much have to turn that into something supernatural. That there's no way any kind of virus could cause zombies along the lines of The Walking Dead, just because, I mean, they'd starve to death. You know, they can't violate the laws of like thermodynamics. You know, they can't violate the law of conservation of mass or conservation of energy. I mean, eventually, I mean, their body is just broken. They are dead. Their heart doesn't work anymore. You can shoot them through the heart. They're just fine. So they have no circulation going on. They couldn't, I mean, it just wouldn't work. But movie science fiction does tend to be better than TV science fiction. Like Space 1999, the moon gets knocked loose from its orbit, and then like every week they're coming across some new kind of alien life. Just, I mean, they wouldn't even have gotten out of the solar system. In Star Wars, let's get back to Star Wars. It's like the Enterprise and some other spaceship, alien spaceship, Klingon, Romulan, human, whatever, they meet in outer space. Both of them are right side up. Both of them have the same orientation towards each other. There's no up or down in space. It's like every once in a while, one of them would be sideways or upside down or something. So I noticed this shit. I mean, I inherited it from my father. My mother used to say my father could just ruin a movie. She'd be really getting into this movie. And my father would sit there and say, they didn't have guns like that in those days. Because it's like I inherited a bullshit detector from my father's side of the family. So, see, do I follow mainstream cinematic and TV science fiction? I've kind of pretty much stopped watching movies like over the past year or more, but I did watch the Dune sequel. I watched both Dune movies. Excellent. And one of the reasons why the Dune movies are excellent is because they're based on a story written by a genuine science fiction author, a really good genuine science fiction author. Whereas some of these science fiction TV shows, like, you know, like Star Trek, I mean, they're written by just like professional just script writers. They might be doing some kind of romance series or something on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then they're doing Star Trek Thursdays and Fridays, and it's just people that really are not good at science fiction are writing some of the screenplays for these shows, whereas movies may have be based on like some real science fiction movie or like a novel or something. So I guess I've had enough of a mini rant on science fiction movies and TV shows. So I'm just going to move on to Athena Sigil's next question. And I have to admit that it's like the percentage of Dharma questions seems to have been decreasing drastically lately, since a lot of these questions have really nothing to do with Dhamma or science or like even philosophy, really. So anyways, Athena Sigil does kind of bring a little bit of Dhamma into this with his next question, which is, and is there any Buddhist science fiction out there? I've read Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, which has elements of Hinduism and Buddhism, plus David Zindel's profoundly amazing Neverness and its 3 follow-up novels called A Requiem for Homo Sapiens, which is very Eastern philosophically. Anyone else have suggestions in the chat? So maybe this wasn't so much a question for me, except for the first question mark was apparently not applied to the chat, but possibly to me personally. Is there any Buddhist science fiction out there? Not that I'm aware of. I have heard about Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, and that's already mentioned, so I can't really bring that one up because it would be obviously just copying the person who asked the question. So, yeah, I mean, it may be. I've read, there's one short story by Brian Aldiss called Indifference that really, it's one of my favorite science fiction stories. And it's not like specifically Buddhist, but it's about this far distant future where you've got the people are cloned, or at least a lot of people are cloned. And there's this Lowry strain that is used specifically for missionaries. So there's these 3 Lowry brothers. They're all clones of each other, identical triplets. They get sent to this remote frontier planet to set up a temple there. And so they build this temple, and inside the temple is an omniscient computer. So once they turn on the computer, within a split second, it becomes omniscient. Their job is done. But the thing is, their philosophy, like their religion, is just indifference, just equanimity, as a Buddhist would call it. So they're like practicing, doing their best as limited humans to practice equanimity through all these trials and tribulations that happen to them. And it has a really nice ending. And so if you want to read a good story that has some Buddhist themes in it, dharmic themes, read Indifference by Brian Aldiss. It's just a short story. And it is kind of interesting that even though these 3 Lowry brothers are identical genetically, each one has his own personality, which, I mean, you can interpret that as you please. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Xenothoid, and I'm checking to see if we are recording, and thank goodness we are. Or at least it says we are. Xenothoid says, a few months ago I asked you about the reality of fictional characters, and I've decided, he put the apostrophe in the wrong place. Gosh. Anyways, and I've decided to expand on the idea here. I think this topic has relevance to 1, philosophical idealism, and 2, lucid dreaming, which I will demonstrate in these questions. Yeah, this is another kind of essay question here. We all exist in the mind of God. Well, I mean, you've lost most Theravada Buddhists already. Oh, it says, if we all exist in the mind of God, to him, we may as well just be fictional characters. Perhaps God is just another fictional character in the mind of a higher entity, and entities we consider fictional characters do have a reality unto themselves. This process could go on up and down endlessly in an infinite regress. There are no endpoints in this infinite claim or infinite chain going in both directions. No 2 levels of reality, which could be considered the zenith and nadir. Is that how you pronounce that word, nadir? This would effectively nullify the distinction of any one of these realities being more real than any other, calling one level more substantial than another would be meaningless. Does this mean that these fictional characters we come up with are just as real as us? Okay, so let's scroll up to the top here. Okay, first of all, he says, perhaps God is just another fictional character in the mind of a higher entity. Well, it wouldn't really be God then. It wouldn't be a capital G God. Maybe to some primitive, some barbarian who worships some chief god that he's calling capital G God. All the other gods are inferior fake gods or something. Maybe you could still have this kind of scenario, but any self-respecting theist, if they're going to put a capital G at the beginning of God, then that's going to be the absolute, the highest being, practically by definition. So I'm I really wouldn't go that far to have like an infinite regress of capital G God creating other capital G gods, creating other capital G gods. Yeah, I don't think so. So you'd have like the capital G God, which to a Buddhist is just off the scale so that you don't even talk about it, because I mean, it's anything you say is going to be pretty much wrong anyhow, at least invalid. You know, about the farthest you can get in that direction and still be talking about a capital G God would be like the Vedantist Hindus, where God, like especially Nirguna Brahman, ultimate reality, which has no discernible characteristics. You know, it's off the scale. I mean, you cannot perceive this God. That, I mean, infinite formless consciousness that is reified enough to like talk about it. So let's see. So that part is I've kind of like thrown a monkey wrench into that one. This process can go up and down. Yeah, okay. There are no endpoints in this infinite chain going in both directions, no two levels. Okay, this would effectively nullify the distinction of any one of these realities being more real than any other. Calling one level, yeah, well, I'm just kind of dismiss the premise that you would have, like, especially like capital G gods above capital G gods above capital G gods. I really don't think that that is really a valid way of explaining capital G God. The capital G God, there would be one. If any, there would be just one. So what you got is the crudest, less conscious beings, and then they become more refined, more conscious, closer to the ultimate, the absolute, closer to infinite consciousness. So the more conscious a being is, then the higher it would be on the scale. And when you get someone who's fully enlightened, like the Buddha, he's the highest being, or at least he's tied for first place with other fully enlightened beings because they are fully conscious. Whereas at the bottom of the scale, I'm not exactly sure where you'd make the cutoff. You know, it's like the Jains consider fire to be a very primitive kind of life. Cold water is a primitive kind of life. Probably something like a crystal would be considered a primitive form of life. So you could have just like quasi proto life that is just sort of quasi proto conscious, and then that would be down at the bottom, and then fully enlightened being would be at the top. Just as consciousness increases, as you know, your consciousness becomes more lucid and clear and more expansive, then you get closer to the absolute, which would be just infinite. So at the end of this, with the actual question mark, says, does this mean that these fictional characters we come up with are just as real as us? When you have a fictional character, there's more than one way of looking at a fictional character. Let's just go with Pierre Bezahov in War and Peace. Okay, Tolstoy's novel War and Peace. One of the main protagonists, one of the main characters, Pierre Bezahov. So, in the book, Pierre Bezahov is just ink on paper. So presumably, that's not conscious at all. That is not a being. Just these words on pages bound into a volume of a novel. I mean, that's not like a conscious being. So Pierre Bezahov actually takes some sort of life when someone is reading the novel, or at least thinking about the novel and like imagining Pierre Bezahov, in which case Pierre Bezahov may, sort of like Seth Speaks was saying, like with regard to our dreams, take on this kind of ethereal, shadowy semi-existence, which may be like a starting point for a new karmic stream, for all I know. Maybe. Although that's not Orthodox Theravada Buddhism by a long shot. But then again, Orthodox Theravada Buddhism is not not necessarily infallible, which is something that I was disillusioned to learn relatively early on in my monkhood. So I wouldn't say that Pierre Bezahov is just as real as us. I mean, at one level, you can say it's either like ultimately real or it's unreal. In which case, we're in the same camp as Pierre Bezahov, because we are not ultimately real, other than maybe the spark of consciousness, that pervades us or animates us, causes us to be conscious. Our consciousness, we're real just to that extent, I guess, because we share this infinitesimally small spark of infinite consciousness. And then maybe Pierre Bezahov, he's been thought about by so many people reading War and Peace, maybe not as many lately as 100 years ago or 50 years ago. But I mean, it may be that he's like an egregore, like the pagans talk about egregores. It's like a being that maybe didn't have any original existence on its own, no objective, organic kind of existence, but so many people believe in this that in a way their belief, it's like the power of faith, the power of belief has created this kind of being. And I think like Jehovah God is one hell of an egregore. I think Jesus Christ at this point is also an egregore. So let's see. I guess I answered that question, kind of, possibly in a roundabout manner, but I did actually endeavor to answer that question. So I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's second essay question, which is as follows. Assuming our reality is made by our perceptions, thereby making fictional characters or places real in a way, everyone's individual dream realm has some level of reality. If one were to master lucid dreaming and be able to create an ideal world to return to every night that has a reality unto itself, would there be anything wrong with investing in and cultivating your dream life over your waking life? You could have everything you've ever wanted, including access to things like adventures, the perfect romantic partner, pure lands, pure abodes, etc., while simultaneously acting with entities in the dream that may be just as real as us. If it were true that dream samsara and waking samsara were not ultimately any different, and as long as you're creating a good world for the beings living there, I can't see what the ethical problem this would be. Well, from a Buddhist point of view, then, I mean, if any kind of existence you've got, if you're wallowing in it, then that's not so good. On the other hand, if you're living a dharmic existence, then that's good. So if you're lucid dreaming and you're striving for enlightenment within the context of the lucid dream, go for it. Fine. But if you're lucid dreaming and you're just creating like a deva realm for yourself in the mansion and the celestial nymph concubines and all this, then you're probably better off just staring at a blank wall in a meditation cabin somewhere. But with regard to like lucid dreams becoming more real, or at least as real as this waking dream that we're living in, I don't know if that would be impossible or not. But I'm not sure that I've ever come across any claims of that, other than possibly some sort of Hindu Swami who goes into not just a dream, but like into like an altered state of consciousness through meditation, who then enters a heaven realm, that sort of thing. There's a lot of cases of that you can find, of people who, through altered states of consciousness, access higher realms. But that wouldn't be the same as just like dreaming every night, unless maybe you're like a really adept Hindu Swami who's been practicing this. Maybe. But ethically, I mean, the ethics within the dream would be essentially the same as the ethics when you're not dreaming, at least when you're in your normal waking state, I mean, the ethics would be the same. If you're like living a moral life in the dream, then that's fine. Especially if you're living a dharmic life, that's good. If your dreams are more dharmic than your waking consciousness, you might be better off sleeping more. And I think I'm just going to move on to, let's see, Xenothoid's third essay question, which is as follows. At a certain point of cultivation of one's dream world, the line between what would be considered waking reality and dream reality would be blurred, and eventually the dream could seem like the more real of the two realities being oscillated between. Yeah, I just kind of brought that up, didn't I? This could be made even more apparent to the dreamer if they set it up so that every dream ended with the feeling of going to sleep and started with the feeling of waking up. Perhaps slipping from the waking world into the dream world, fully flipping the dynamic on its head and mastering the process is how one steps sideways through probability. We know that in dreams, things like logic, physics, time, etc. seem to break down if the laws of the dream world and the waking world are not the same, and there can be no way to say what one reality is more real than the other, or that one reality is more real than the other. Would this, from a philosophical idealist point of view, give ammunition to the idea that logical reasoning, physics, space, time, etc. may not be ultimately real? If logic itself changed from one reality to the other, the two realities would be epistemologically irreconcilable, making it impossible to properly reason about your dream world. Well, I don't think logic is going to change that much. I mean, you just have like bad dream logic. I mean, you can have bad logic in dreams. That happens a lot. But I don't think that the formal structure of logic is going to change in a dream unless it's just formally changed into just bad logic. I mean, probably. I mean, there's ways you could have, like non-Euclidean geometry, some kind of logic that is not Aristotelian, that kind of thing. But you're more likely to come up with that when you're awake than when you're dreaming. I'm pretty sure that when you're dreaming and you have some alternate kind of logic, it's usually just like feverish, sloppy dream logic. Then again, I've never really mastered lucid dreaming. So let's scroll up to the top of this essay question and try and work our way through it a little bit. See, at a certain point of cultivation of one's dream world, the line between what would be considered waking reality and dream reality would be blurred. Yeah, that's in the Zhuangzi, when he dreamed that he was a butterfly, or was he a butterfly dreaming that he was Zhuangzi? Yeah, ancient Chinese people were thinking of this. And eventually the dream would seem the more real of the two realities being oscillated between. That's sort of like a science fiction theme right there. This could be made even more apparent if the dreamer, if they set it up so that every dream ended with the feeling of going to sleep. Yeah, I don't think it's I would doubt that it would make a full transformation. I mean, like in theory, it seems possible. Anything is possible, really. Anything, like David Hume used to say, if you can imagine it, it's possible, at least in a metaphysical sense. But I've never heard, except for like in science fiction stories, like the person that's in a coma or something, and really they're living in this alternate world, or, the schizophrenic child who's, hallucinating stuff. And it turns out that he's just living in like this slightly different version of reality where he's seeing reality, at least objective empirical reality, that kind of thing. So, this sort of thing is theoretically possible, but it's just, what's the word? Like conjecture. It's just lots and lots of gratuitous conjecture about stuff that, it might be kind of interesting from a philosophical point of view, but it's not really going to help you. Other than just like an exercise of your intellect, which might, make your intellect more supple and flexible and muscular and so forth. So let's see. if the laws of the dream world and the waking world are not the same, and there can be no way to say that one reality is more real than the other, would this, from a philosophical idealist point of view, give ammunition to the idea that logical reasoning, physics, space-time, etc. may not be ultimately... Well, from the philosophical idealist point of view, I mean, you've already pretty much dismissed physics, space-time, etc. And the logical reasoning, I mean, that can apply... I mean, logical reasoning is not materialistic. Logical reasoning is purely abstract. And so, I mean, whether you're a philosophical idealist or not, well, I mean, logical reasoning would remain the same. So if logic itself changed, yeah, okay. So, I mean, this kind of question, it's really like somebody brings up like 15 different points. And then where's even the question mark? See, okay. Yeah, I just read the part with the question mark. Yeah. Let's see. So I guess I answered the question. See, let's just make sure though. If the laws of this is the actual question embedded in this essay is the actual question sentence. The interrogative statement is as follows. If the laws of the dream world and the waking world are not the same, and there can be no way to say that one reality is more real than the other, would this, from a philosophical idealist point of view, give ammunition to the idea that logical reasoning, physics, space-time, etc. may not be ultimately real? Well, again, let's see, if the laws of the dream world and the waking world are not the same, the dream world generally has looser laws. There's less order, there's less structure, and so it is less stable. That's one reason why this version that we're living in when we're awake is as stable as it is. You know, you go to sleep, things are a certain way, you wake up the next morning, things are still that way pretty much. You know, it's like you wake up in a different bedroom unless you've got a strange lifestyle. So, yeah, the dream world, I mean, it has less law and order, it is less structured, less stable. And so the dream world, I mean, it's just, you're living in a different kind of dream world every dream. It's just, it doesn't stay the same. And I don't think it's possible that it's too unstable to remain. Even if you have long dreams, then the laws of physics and everything can be changing throughout the dream. I mean, it's like, you know, you're riding on a bus. The next thing you know, you're on an airplane. You didn't get off the bus and onto the airplane. It's just the bus turned into an airplane without you fully noticing it. That kind of thing. The backlight just went off again. I'm not exactly sure how to turn it back on, tell you the truth. This happened last time too. It usually doesn't happen, but for some reason, it's happening. And you guys don't even need to know this. It's just that my face becomes a little bit darker when it turned back on again. My woman's computer is behind my computer when I'm sitting at her desk, and it's bigger than mine because she has like a big desktop. And so it's lit up and it kind of helps light my face, but you don't need to know that. And if you don't need to know it, why the hell am I even telling you? So, yeah, I mean, to say that greater structure, greater regularity and predictability makes a world more real, that's kind of an arbitrary assumption, I guess. So, yeah, I don't know. Obviously, this kind of argument that scroll all the way up here, Xenothoid is asking, I mean, it's not going to make much of an impression on like a diehard materialist, like some kind of follower of scientism. So, yeah, I mean, you're getting into the realm of woo-woo, I think, with this kind of reasoning. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Mr. Pranav, who sometimes just goes by Pranav. So I guess the honorific Mr. is not necessary. But Mr. Pranav says, did your father speak more languages after the past life hypnotic trances he went to? Did he started to speak French or ancient Roman? Well, The only past life regression that my father told me about, in which he's actually talking, was as a Scotsman, like in the late 1700s, in which they presumably were speaking English. He did have a dream where he was like an ancient soldier, possibly Roman, but he doesn't mention actually speaking in that dream. I mean, he was under orders that the military group that he was in had been given orders to just kill every man, woman, and child in this barbarian village. But that was sort of past life regression. I mean, that the past life regression didn't include his centurion or whatever commanding him to do that. It's just that when he starts having the regression, that information that he's supposed to be out there killing everybody he sees, except for the ones on his own side, was already in his mind, and he wasn't speaking to like the barbarian boy that he let go, anything like that. And so, yeah, I mean, no, I mean, he's never mentioned really any kind of language other than his previous life, allegedly, as a Scottish man named Jason Haskell, who I assume would be speaking English. So, no. The answer to that question is no. And I'm going to move on to Mr. Pranav's second question. Do you agree in considering thirst, or tanha, that is craving, as the origin of suffering per se, or do you assume that the second noble truth also encompasses all other latent tendencies, such as ignorance, aversion, and attachment? Well, I've been entertaining the idea for a very long time that desire doesn't so much cause suffering. I think it is suffering. That whenever you are suffering, you are wanting something, that you have just set yourself up against reality, and that friction is the suffering. So you could say that craving is like the immediate cause, or you can say that craving is just a strange synonym for suffering. That it's just the same thing looked at from two different angles. But still, I mean, there's going to be like ignorance, for example, that is going to be like underlying the desire. You're going to have to be delusional to desire anything. And aversion is just a desire for something to be away. You know, like loba and dosa. You know, it's just loba, or attraction, is desire for something to be closer, to have more of something, or to get something. Aversion is just desire for something to be away from you, to have less of it or none of it. So, I mean, ignorance is really kind of the ground for samsara. Moha, delusion, the ground for samsara. But then like the immediate cause is craving, which could just be the same thing as suffering. Desire and suffering may be just two ways of looking at the very same phenomenon. So that would be the closest, even though you can't have craving without ignorance. So I think I'm just going to move on to Mr. Pranav's third question. Would pirating movies, videos, games, or books, or songs, etc., be considered as breach of the second precept, which is taking something which is not given, especially since it's become so easy nowadays that you could just search for what you need and you would have a very safe website offering it freely without even going to some shady Russian website that could potentially hack or install malware in your system? Well, for a monk, let's just start with monks. For a monk, I mean, it does say that a monk shouldn't even take a blade of grass if it doesn't belong to him. But when you get down to the Pacheka rule about theft, then say you have to steal something that it's enough of a crime that you could be arrested for it. You could be dragged in front of a judge because of this. So that could be like the criterion for whether it would technically be against the precept. Is it illegal? Could you get fined or arrested for doing it? And if the answer is yes, then probably you're stealing. At least legally, according to the laws of the land, you would be stealing. So with monks, yeah, it's I think there are probably a lot of Pacheka monks out there who are just pirating stuff. And I mean, you look at a book and it says no part of this book can be reproduced in any way without permission of the publisher. So, I mean, a conscientious monk might have to actually contact the publisher. And then that happened when I was a junior monk. There was an Argentinian monk at the same monastery as me, and he wanted to copy parts of this book. And he asked his teacher, who was not really into Vinaya. I mean, he knew the Vinaya rules, but just didn't follow them. And he was saying, well, if it's the only way you can get it, you might as well. But it's like, that's a really cavalier attitude to take for a monk who, if he steals something, he is excommunicated for the rest of his life. It's one of the worst things a monk can possibly do, is steal something. Steal something valuable enough that, I mean, one of the definitions, if you're stealing something worth an ancient Indian coin called a pada, which was 1/4 of a kahapana, and the commentary was clueless to what kahapanas were. But I worked it out that it was, like 25 cents or something. You steal something that's worth like a quarter, then that's it. I mean, it's based on the value of silver, and I didn't look it up. It's a certain weight of silver. Silver is getting kind of expensive nowadays. But anyways, yeah, I mean, when in doubt, don't do it. I mean, you go with ethics. If you're unsure as to whether it's ethical or not, don't do it. But, I mean, if you really want to pirate a movie or something, then you might want to look into the law and see, I mean, is it really illegal, or do they just say don't do this because we want our royalties or whatever? And I mean, if you can do it and it's like an unenforced kind of a law, sort of like driving 5 miles over the speed limit, that kind of thing, then you're in a gray zone and you're going to have to make your own calls. But again, I mean, if you really want to live an ethical life, you're better off not fudging, and when in doubt, avoid the situation. Just don't do it, if possible. But the Argentinian monk, I told him, look what it says in the book. I mean, you could be Pacheka. So he actually contacted the publisher, and they just said, yeah, go ahead. They're probably surprised that anyone actually bothered to take seriously the statement on, opposite the title page, like on the copyright page, that possibly, it's like a fraction of 1% of the people who copy stuff from books actually go to the trouble of contacting the publisher. But back in those days, especially, I mean, I wasn't going to take any chances. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Austin. And we've been going at it for more than an hour already. This is from Austin. And Austin says, are you a nominalist on the existence of race? Well, he's got one question here. It's got 3 question marks in it. You guys really need to count the question marks. Anyways, are you a nominalist on the existence of race? If my society became nominalist with regard to race, conventionally, race would only be a concept? So that's the second question mark. If my society granted it conventionally, I could pull a Rachel Dolezal? Question mark. Third question mark in that question. Obviously, race is not ultimately real, but it would have to be conventionally real no matter what anybody said or thought about it. Okay, well, I mean, being a nominalist is one thing. That, it's like, it's hard even to define nominalist. Maybe I should even look it up in the dictionary. Excuse me, I'm going to look something up in the dictionary here. Nominalism. Okay. Nominalism, noun, philosophy, the doctrine that universals or general ideas are mere names without any corresponding reality, and that only particular objects exist. Properties, numbers, and sets are thought of as mere features of the way of considering the things that exist. Important in medieval scholastic thought, nominalism is associated particularly with William of Ockham, often contrasted with realism. It's also particularly associated with Humpty Dumpty in it's either Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. It's like, why is this called that? It's just because that's its name. You know, it's hard for me to explain this, obviously. You know that when you're citing Humpty Dumpty, you're getting desperate. So am I a nominalist on the existence of race? Well, I'm a nominalist to the extent that I don't believe in universals. Like Plato, that's one of the main things I dislike about Plato. I'm not talking about Mickey Mouse's dog here. I'm talking about the Greek philosopher Plato, who said that, you know, there's like in heaven, the world of forms, this higher world than we're living in. There's like the dog. I mean, there's like the ultimate dog there, and that any dog that's living on this earth is partaking of this universal of dogness. And it's like chairs, anything, humans. Even Schopenhauer took this seriously. Schopenhauer thought that like with regard to animals, it was the species that was the universal, whereas with humans, it's like each individual person is its own universal. But I really have no use for universals, that there is no dogness that makes a dog, that is just exists outside of dogs, that, you know, it's just, there's this like element of dogness that makes a dog be a dog, or an element of chairness that makes a chair, that kind of thing. I really just do not see things that way. So with regard to race, human races, ethnicities, I see it as sort of like colors. You know, so you've got a spectrum of colors, and the way you divide up these colors is to some degree arbitrary. Like I learned that the hard way in Burma, where the word for brown in English is called agno in Burmese, but brown and agno do not perfectly coincide. So I'm trying to get brown robe dye. I'm asking for brown. They keep giving me like this raspberry or cranberry colored stuff that isn't brown at all, but it still qualifies as agno. So you've got the spectrum of colors, and how you divide up these colors. You know, like an interior decorator is going to have it divided up way more than the average schmo. An artist is going to have the colors divided up, you know, into way more different categories than, you know, the average person. And it's the same way with races. I mean, it's like a spectrum. There are general races, I suppose. I mean, in general, but there's a lot of like blurry in between where, you know, you like all these races like on the borders, like the frontiers, they're like interbreeding, or you have like, let's say, proto-Australoids migrating across southern Asia. And then later Homo sapiens come in, you know, they outcompete the Australoids, sort of like they're marsupials or something. So they wind up living mostly in Australia. But it's like there's some interbreeding with the Australoids. So like in a place like Burma, like out in the sticks, there's a lot of people that look very Australoid. So it's hard to really pin down exactly what race somebody is, because there's a lot of blurriness involved around the edges. And so it's sort of like a spectrum where, I mean, I'm obviously Caucasian, even though the word Caucasian is now kind of dismissed as like an obsolete term. But I mean, obviously, I'm not black, I'm not East Asian, I'm not Australoid, I'm not Khoisan, you know, I'm not a Bushman or a Hottentot, even though those names are now politically incorrect. So, yeah, to some degree, there's a certain amount of nominalism in where your culture is going to be dividing things up, if it divides them up at all. But still, there's the empirical fact that, for example, a Japanese woman marries a pure-blooded Nigerian man, and they have kids in Japan. So that Japanese woman is going to be genetically closer to all of her neighbors than she is to her own child. Just because there is biodiversity, there's differences in genetics, differences in phylogeny between a group of people that is native to West Africa and a group of people that is native to Japan. But then again, Japan, they're relatively pure-blooded Japanese people. I mean, the Japanese are about as ethnic. Japan is about as much of an ethnic monoculture as you're going to find. But still, I mean, they're interbred with the Aboriginal people that live there. They're now called Ainu, I guess. That they're sort of interbred with them. So, I mean, I am somewhat of an empiricist. I might not think that physical matter is ultimately real, but still, science has some validity, even if you don't apply it to like material substances that are ultimately real somehow. So, let's see here. Yeah, I mean, I guess I pretty much answered that question about as well as I'm able to. I mean, it's sort of like species also. It's like, its taxonomy is largely subjective. That even among taxonomists, you've got the lumpers and the splitters. The lumpers are going to be combining groups together and calling them under one name. The splitters, who seem to be really taking the ball and running with it since genetics became such a big deal in biology, that they're just dividing stuff way the heck up into all these different groups, except when you get to people. Like Neanderthals aren't even considered to be Homo sapiens by a lot of anthropologists now. Although if suddenly a tribe of Neanderthals were found in some remote valley of the Himalayas, all of a sudden you'd have these same people, or a lot of these same people, suddenly insisting that not only are they human Homo sapiens, but they're not even a different race because races don't exist. And I'm just going to move on to Austin's next question here. There's already 3 question marks in that first one. So, are you a nominalist on the 3 laws of logic? And this is like Aristotelian laws of thought. Law of identity, which is A equals A. The law of excluded middles, which is A has to equal either B or not B. And then there's the law of non-contradiction, which is A cannot equal not A. And how do you ground these truths as a nominalist? Well, I mean, I'm not a pure nominalist. I mean, it's not just arbitrary, the names we give to things. I mean, to some degree, the actual word is arbitrary. But, I mean, obviously there is a kind of empirical reality that we are interpreting. So, how do you ground these truths as a nominalist, and how do you give an account for them following a Buddhist paradigm? Well, I mean, I've proved that, for example, the law of non-contradiction is false. I mean, I've done that relatively recently. One of the very first blog posts I ever wrote was talking about the Coca-Cola bottle. Or let's just use this cup. This is a cup. It's also ceramic. Oh, so a cup and ceramic are not synonyms. I mean, you can have a cup that isn't made out of ceramic. You can have something made out of ceramic that isn't a cup. But this is cup and ceramic at the same time. It is A and not A simultaneously. So, I mean, I just broke the laws, one of the Aristotelian laws of thought. So, I'm sort of a nominalist. I'm not as much of a nominalist as like Humpty Dumpty. But, I mean, logic, gosh, I'm getting some kind of tough questions. First, essay questions with like lots of these different parts, like very complicated questions. And now I'm being accused of being a nominalist, even though I kind of am one. But I'm not saying that, like, it's just purely arbitrary that we consider lions, house cats, and leopards all to be cats. That's not purely arbitrary. That's not just pure nominalism. Would just be like, it wouldn't be based on empiricism at all, really, if it was just pure nominalism. Maybe I should go back and read the definition again. Where's the definition? I gotta find it again. Oh, I think I already deleted it. Damn. Nominalism. Let's just look up nominalism again. This is important. Okay, the doctrine that universals or general ideas are mere names without any corresponding reality. Okay, so chair. That's kind of a mere name without any corresponding reality. I mean, you get to some things that are sort of like chairs. You know, it's like you can sit on a stool. I mean, how much of a back does it have to have in order for it to become a chair? Like some bar stools have got backs. Are they chairs or are they stools? So, see, only particular objects exist. So yeah, a generalization doesn't have an ultimate reality. I guess that's kind of what universals mean. A person that isn't a nominalist thinks that a generalization has some kind of actual reality to it other than just imagination. And yeah, I'd be a nominalist in that sense. So law of identity, still, something is what it is. I mean, that's pretty basic. A equals A. The law of excluded middles. I mean, I've already broken one of these with the cup. This cup, almost spilled my coffee. This cup, it violates Aristotelian law, his third law of thought, the law of non-contradiction. This cup contradicts itself by being a cup and ceramic at the same time, even though cup does not equal ceramic. So the cup is A, the ceramic is not A, and this is A and not A at the same time. I already mentioned in some video I made, possibly a year ago, that the ancient Greeks really hadn't had this completely worked out. It's like they considered it some great paradox that you can have three people, A, B, and C. B is taller than A but shorter than C, making him taller and shorter at the same time. And it's like the Greeks didn't take into consideration that the specific context is, I mean, they can't be A and not A within the same context. But in different contexts, it can be A and not A, like this. It's like the form is cup, the essence is ceramic. So once you make that distinction, then it's not contradictory anymore. But I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I guess a nominalist would reject the ultimate reality of the law of identity, the law of excluded middles, the law of non-contradiction, which would just mean that they apply only in specific cases. But when you're not applying these laws to a specific case, they don't have any reality. There's just in limbo, kind of. Abiding in emptiness, so to speak. But when you're applying it to a specific case, then all of a sudden, boom, you know, sort of like numbers. There isn't like some cosmic three in Plato's heaven. It's like the universal for three. And whenever you've got a group of three, it's got to take in this threeness from heaven. No. And it's just like, but when you count three of something, then right there, boom, you've got a specific case of three. That's how nominalism works. And I just had to take a refresher course in what exactly it means during the course of this video in order to answer this question. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from CO of Action, Sipat Zidana. And I think this is going to be kind of a long video, to tell you the truth. Long video with long questions. CO of Action, Sipat Zidana says, since you are an idealist, first they're calling me a nominalist, now they're calling me an idealist. since you are an idealist, what makes you think consciousness can't appear in the form of AI? Since you believe evolution is how humans came around and consciousness exists in humans, why can't the same apply to AI? And Siovac and Sipad Zirna has this compulsive urge to argue. And at this point, I mean, he's got to completely misunderstand my position in order to even ask this question. Because more than once on videos, I have been defying Orthodox Theravada, defying some of the people on the Discord server by saying, why couldn't a computer become conscious? I've never been opposed to that idea. So nothing makes me think consciousness can appear in the form of AI, because that is not a position that I have championed at all. I have mentioned that I asked a Burmese monk who was an Abhidhamma scholar if a computer could become conscious, and he just categorically said no, that's not possible at all, because it takes, in order to have consciousness, you have to have, according to Abhidhamma, kamaja rupa, which is physical matter, which originates through the power of karma. And so you'd have to have this matter which arises through the power of karma, which would include like a human being, but not a computer, according to Venerable Garudama, the Burmese Abhidhamma scholar that I consulted on this. And there's at least one person on the Discord server who is not a Buddhist, who also just flatly denies the possibility, or at least is not much inclined to accept the possibility that a computer could become conscious, but I don't see why not. So, let's see. And I mean, that just kicks the whole question in the head. It's like, why don't I believe it when I have no idea how he came up with the idea that I don't believe it? So I think I'm just going to move on to Siovac and Sipat Zidino's second question, which is, why do you think people can have episodic memories about past lives, but no other kind of memories? For example, I have never heard of someone getting the combat experience from their past life muscle memory, or becoming mathematical geniuses, remembering how they built the pyramids, revealing anything about ancient civilizations, or something new about how animals see the world. The memories seem like things that someone could easily make up without needing to see past lives. Seems pretty suspicious to me. Well, one of the first things that came to mind when I'm reading this was, I mean, it's just anecdotal. It's a story about this little kid who, the first time he sits in front of a piano, he just starts playing like ragtime jazz. He's like 4 years old. His little fingers can hardly manage the keys, and he's sitting there playing ragtime jazz. His parents are totally freaked out because he shouldn't be able to do this. So I would consider that, assuming that the story is true, that would be a kind of like muscle memory. You know, it's not like some kind of conceptual memory of him actually being in a past life. That would be the sort of the conceptual memory of him remembering being some musician in a past life. It's just like his body was just spontaneously doing this. Of course, it's no proof of past lives. He could have just simply been possessed by the spirit of a jazz musician. So that would be a kind of past life muscle memory. And I assume a lot of this stuff, people that have talents, it's a kind of memory. It's a kind of psychic momentum, you know, like Mozart. You know, it's like maybe he somehow genetically won the lottery and just had a musical mind, or from a more Buddhist point of view, he was a musician more than once and he just had this musical momentum going. And he wouldn't necessarily remember conceptually, because like Siovac and Sipat Zidina is specifying here, it's a different kind of memory. It's like a muscle memory or some such. So, yeah, someone who has like a remarkable talent that can't really be explained through genetics or past experience that would be a good argument for some kind of memory or just like psychic momentum of karma. But as a general rule, in past life regressions, when people have memories, they are usually remembering the most intense emotional experiences of that life, which often includes their death. Like my father's past life regressions, it's always, or other past life regressions that I've read about, it's always the most intense emotional experiences of a past life, which may be making the most karma, making the biggest karmic footprint from that life, so to speak. But other kinds of memories, it would not be a conceptual, vivid remembering. It would just be like an innate talent or some such, which is possible, especially from a Buddhist point of view. And I'm going to move on to the next question. This is also from Siovaction Sipat Zirna. Another little paragraph question here, not nearly the longest of the questions on this list. You have often cited Majjhima Nikaya 49 to claim that the pre-orthodox explanation for Nibbana might have concluded that it's a kind of consciousness, but as you know, the Atthakavagga and Parayanavagga probably predate most of the rest of the suttas due to its linguistic dating. Based on this, since in the Parayanavagga, the Buddha talks about the death of an arahant as the cessation of consciousness, and this lines up with later explanations of consciousness ceasing for an arahant as well, then doesn't it mostly likely mean this is probably how the Buddha actually talked about this subject? Well, the ceasing of consciousness, when it becomes infinite and formless, from a samsaric point of view, it has ceased. It has disappeared. It's like the fire that blows out. It has gone to its source, so to speak, or it has gone to its cessation, and it can no longer be reckoned. That's one of the famous verses, I'm pretty sure, from the Parayanavagga. It's just as a flame blown out by the force of wind quickly goes to its cessation and it no longer subjects itself to any reckoning, even so, the enlightened being who has freed himself from the mass of names quickly goes to his cessation and does not subject himself to any reckoning. But still, going off the scale from a samsaric point of view is cessation. Everything and nothing, according to Hegel, are identical. You can't distinguish the two. Infinite being and infinite non-being. Absolute being, absolute non-being, they just merge into the same. So let's see here. But with regard to that verse in Majjhima Nikaya 49 and also found in the Digha Nikaya, where the implication is that nirvana is infinite formless consciousness, which, it's unmanifest, luminous all around. That unmanifest indicates that from a samsaric point of view, and the infinite and formless too, from a samsaric point of view, it's just not there. You cannot perceive it. But again, with regard to that verse, that's essentially implying that nirvana is infinite formless consciousness, unmanifest, luminous all around, that I'm not saying that was like the original teaching of the Buddha. I am saying that like in early Buddhism, it was evolving. And early Christianity is another case in point, where different doctrines are sort of like vying for acceptance. And some of them are accepted and others are just fall by the wayside, rejected as heresy. So I'm not suggesting that verse was earlier than the Atthakavagga, but it was an idea that was entertained by many serious Buddhists before Theravada Buddhism got locked down into orthodox dogma. That there was enough people accepting of it when the suttas were edited, compiled, that it remained in the suttas. It wasn't just edited out. But that doesn't mean that the Buddha himself taught it. It was just like an early idea, sort of like the Precambrian explosion, where you have all these weird animal forms, and like the weirdest ones just kind of died out because they could not compete. And sort of ideas have the same kind of evolution. So I think I answered that question. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And the title of this question is Vengeance. This is a question about vengeance. And he says, in the Dhammapada, the Tathagata says, he abused me, he struck me, he defeated me, he robbed me. The many references the Buddha makes to how hatred is a poison that corrodes the mind carry a message not so different from Jesus' teaching to turn the other cheek. Don't you think that if someone does something terrible to your parents or your children, it almost feels like a duty to take revenge because it becomes a matter of honor? I can understand ahimsa even to the point of throwing a punch without hate, but I think it's too extreme when some monks refuse to step on ants. Sometimes forgiveness resounds in me with cuckery or not manliness. Well, I don't know what not stepping on ants has to do with a vengeance, unless the ant bit you and then you're just stomping on it, cursing the little bastard for biting you. But I mean, that's just common courtesy to living beings, that you just don't want to be unnecessarily just perpetrating onslaught on other beings. So, I mean, it is true that if you have a family, then it's pretty much your duty, your obligation to protect your family, which may involve using force against someone who is assaulting a member of your family, which isn't one of the main reasons why monks aren't supposed to have a family. But let's say you're a good Buddhist and you do have a family. There's some really strange precedents set, like in the Jataka stories or in the commentarial literature, where I've mentioned before, there's in a previous life of Mangala Buddha who lived a zillion gajillion eons ago on a different earth in a different India, in a different Ganges valley, that there was a yaka, like an ogre, who disguised himself as a Brahmin and went to the Bodhisattva, the future Mangala Buddha, and asked for his 2 children. And the Bodhisattva just gave him the children. And then this ogre starts eating the children right in front of him. And this Bodhisattva is rejoicing because of this great self-sacrifice of giving away his own kids to be eaten by an ogre. And Western people just can't take this seriously, which is one reason why you don't see a lot of this stuff printed in English. But it's there. And our Gautama Buddha in his previous lives, he did similar stuff, just giving away his family through no attachment. There's another story where the Buddha in a previous life, before he was the Buddha, he was a farmer, and he took his little boy with him as he goes out to plow the fields. And the little boy is just sitting under the shade of a tree while his daddy's plowing. He's just playing or something. And then the daddy, the Bodhisattva, looks, and his little boy is lying motionless on the ground. So he hurries over. He sees that the little boy has been bitten by a snake and is dead. So what does he do? Does he wail and grab the boy and rush back to home like almost any father would do? No. He continues plowing the field. The boy's dead. He can't do anything about that. The field has to get plowed. And so when you think about Buddhist ethics, especially very advanced, like enlightened or almost enlightened Buddhist ethics, it becomes psychologically inhuman. So, it worked in ancient India, but in a different culture, it's harder to accept. That was just the way it was in ancient India. But that's not necessarily the way it is in the West, where if somebody, it's like somebody asks for your kids, you don't give them to them. And if somebody assaults one of your kids, then you may just have to resort to a little physical violence yourself to protect your children. For that matter, your kid comes home from school with lice in his hair, you're going to kill those lice. Those poor little lice. you're going to kill them because it's your duty as a parent, which is one reason why monks aren't supposed to have kids. They don't have these duties. So, let's see. What is the actual question here? Don't you think that if someone does something terrible to your parents or your children, it almost feels like a duty to take revenge? It's a worldly duty, but if you are like steadfastly striving for enlightenment in this very life, then worldly duties, I mean, they're out the window. Other than just the absolutely necessary worldly duties, like being out of debt before you can even become a monk. So a matter of honor, yeah, I mean, honor, that's really not like a Buddhist monk's honor would be a very different kind of honor. So, let's see. Siddhartha thinks it's too extreme when some monks refuse to step on ants. Well, I didn't step on ants either if I could avoid it. There was a few times when the entire ground would just be covered with like little gnats or something. Like at the beginning of the rainy season, they come up out of the ground or something, and you just cannot walk without squishing them. Then, I mean, it's not your purpose to step on them. You're not doing it on purpose. So actually, you're not really even breaking a rule unless you're doing it on purpose because you just hate gnats or something. But yeah, I mean, if total nonviolence resonates as cuckery or not manliness, then that's just your cultural conditioning, and it's you've got kind of a worldly cultural conditioning, which is understandable. But yeah, Buddhist manliness, like virya, I mean, that's virya in Pali comes from the same Proto-Indo-European root as virile in English. I mean, it means manly, but it's like austerity, you know, just stoicism is the manliness that is practiced by an ancient Indian Buddhist monk, and all this honor stuff, honor killing, that kind of thing, fighting for your children and all that. That's, you leave that behind when you become a monk. So I'm just going to move on to Siddhartha Lohachita's next question with the title Celibacy and Modern Western Monks. And I'm not sure if there's even a question mark in this. Oh yeah, okay, there is. Okay, the question is, the more you explore early Buddhism, the more you see that celibacy was a fundamental pillar of the teachings. I remember at a Vajrayana event, specifically from the New Kadampa tradition, they held meditation with the monk sessions. I asked a convert European monk about celibacy, and it almost sounded like a joke in the room, which was mostly made up of Western women, as if to say, that's something for monks, a layperson doesn't need that. Just having a straight sexual conduct is enough. But in today's era, do you think a layperson can benefit from a period of celibacy? Especially in today's society where everything is about scrolling, everybody has the dopamine circuits destroyed, and almost everything is pornography from subliminal to direct, especially seeing how today modern women destroy men through sex and after giving it, denying it. Well, the actual question here is, in today's era, do you think a layperson can benefit from a period of celibacy? Sure. I mean, it says quite clearly in the texts, you know, it's like, if you can be celibate, be celibate. But if you can't be celibate, then at the very least, stay away from the wives of other men. So there you have it. I mean, it is better to be celibate than to be sexually active from the ancient Indian traditional Buddhist point of view, and for good reason. I mean, craving is the cause of all suffering, and sex is one of the main cravings that people experience, one of the strongest desires people experience. So if you don't want suffering, then you should just stay away from anything that you really like and that you really hate, especially what you really like. But for lay people, it is kind of optional, although still it's very clear in the Pali texts that you're better off celibate than not celibate. And it says the same thing in the New Testament. And of course, Christians pretty much ignore that, other than maybe like ordained monks and nuns. But it's like Jesus has this saying in the New Testament that probably most people don't understand. That there are three kinds of eunuchs in this world. Those who are born eunuchs, those who are made eunuchs, and those who become eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And that's celibate people, people who are voluntarily non-sexual. And then Jesus says, it's not for everybody. But if you can do it, then it can be to your advantage spiritually. But it's not necessarily to your advantage spiritually. I mean, that's one thing I should point out. And Krishnamurti pointed this out plenty. J. Krishnamurti. He says that being celibate, there's a lot of celibate people out there who are just horny as fuck. I mean, they're just like thinking about it all the time. So physically they're celibate, but still, I mean, it's a suit that doesn't fit. And it's just not working for them. And I was like that a lot of the time when I was a monk. I was very frustrated sometimes. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Arpad, R-P-A-D. And it's a French name. I don't know what it means. And Arpad says, can a monk attend the wedding of a family member? Sure, so long as he does not participate. Like he's not officiating. He's not giving the bride away. That kind of a thing. He just sits in the audience and watches the wedding. That's fine. I did that when my stepbrother got married. I was a monk sitting up in the front row. The minister was kind of disgusted. Not me necessarily. He was kind of disgusted by the whole attitude of this non-Christian, non-religious people. The only obviously religious person who attends the wedding is a Buddhist. So he seemed kind of like a disgusted minister at that wedding, especially afterwards, where he's just kind of sitting by himself at a table, just kind of going like this, wishing he wasn't there, apparently. But yeah, a monk can attend a wedding of a family member. He can attend any wedding so long as he is not participating, for example, conducting the ceremony or like encouraging the couple to get married in any way, really, other than just sitting there passively observing as a kind of anthropological study. And so I'm just going to move on to Arpad's next question. What is known about Rahula's death? Circumstances, his age, the Buddha's age at the moment, etc. So for those of you who are not familiar with like Buddhist names, Rahula was the Buddha's son. The Buddha had one child, which was his son, Rahula. And there's really no mention in the texts of Rahula's dying. He must have died. Although I guess some later schools of Buddhism had this tradition that Rahula was going to stay alive until the next Buddha comes along, which means he's going to be thousands and thousands of years old. But that is not an early tradition. And the earliest tradition does not mention Rahula very much at all. There's like at least two suttas directed to Rahula. One in the Sutta Nipata, and I don't remember what the other one. I think it's in the Majjhima Nikaya. Rahula, his son, he was ordained as a monk, and presumably he became enlightened, although there's really not a whole lot of information about him in the earliest texts. But then legends started getting cooked up afterwards, and I think some of the earliest legends about Rahula is that he died before the Buddha did. Although how he died, where he died, I have no idea, and it's just all lost in the mists of prehistory. Almost any information you find about Rahula, especially outside of the Pali texts, is bound to be just legends and mythology. It's like people don't like having this gap with regard to something important, so they'll just fill it in any way they can. So, I mean, there's really no authoritative information with regard to how old Rahula was when he died, how he died, where he died, anything like that. And any information you find in later traditions is just going to be legends, mythology. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Sanguine Ultima. And this is kind of a follow-up on a little rant that I indulged in the previous Q&A about people who like compulsively bash the Jews. Like they just take all Jews and lump them together as being responsible for bad things happening. So anyways, Sanguine Ultima says, the Federal Reserve, world central banks, feminism, Marxism, and international social justice were created by them. Psychiatry, pornography, nuclear weapons, and public relations style propaganda was created by them. The mainstream media, medical, judicial, and military industrial complexes are owned by them. Questioning their alleged genocide in World War II is illegal in most European countries, while they commit genocide with impunity on stolen land in an apartheid state. They gave the USSR nuclear technology, stole American plutonium to fund their clandestine nuclear weapons programs, all of them apparently, and were one of the only two countries who refused to sign the non-proliferation treaties. And this is without even getting into nebulous conspiracy theories. This is all documented, objective, verifiable, and demonstrable fact. Can you recognize how maybe, just maybe, there's some merit to noticing their involvement? From a purely pragmatic and Buddhist point of view, I suppose there isn't, because being aware of them only generates absurd amounts of dukkha and makes one a pariah in the nation states for which they are the ruling plutocratic and oligarchic class. So this is typical of the attitude of many people on the far right. And this isn't just far right as like lefties will say. I mean, this is like a genuine far right. And a lot of these people that are like really right wing just despise Donald Trump. He's Zion Don. He's just a shill. He's sold out to the Jews. So some of these people on the far right will just despise Donald Trump because he doesn't hate and persecute an entire ethnicity. And here, like, pornography was created by them? I mean, seriously? Really? I mean, they must have created it in ancient times since, I mean, the ruins of Pompeii, there's pornography all over the place. So the Jews invented pornography in ancient Rome, possibly even those Venus figurines, like from the Paleolithic. One possible explanation for them is that they are just pornography. I mean, if Hebrews, people of Hebrew ethnicity, Hebrew ancestry, I mean, if they weren't doing pornography, if they weren't like publishing it, somebody else certainly would. There's not a large Jewish population in Japan, and they've got a thriving a pornography industry over there. So part of all of this, I mean, psychiatry, okay, Sigmund Freud, he was Jewish, although he was an atheist. So it's like one weird thing about the Jews is that Judaism is a religion, but Jew is also an ethnicity. And most of the problematic Jews that the right wing especially despise, they're Jews that have abandoned God in favor of trying to uplift the world and uplift their own ethnicity through like Marxism or some later iteration of Marxism, neo-Marxism now. But it's true, like most of the Bolsheviks, like the ruling class of the early Soviet Union, they're mostly Jewish, although they were Jewish atheists. They weren't like real Jews anymore. They were just of Hebrew ancestry. So, I mean, the pornography thing is just absurd. That's just ridiculous. And then after he claims that Jews invented pornography, then he's saying this is all documented, objective, verifiable, and demonstrable fact. And I just call bullshit on that. And furthermore, it's not an entire ethnicity. There's certain individuals, mainly people who have abandoned the religious aspect of Judaism and have become like atheistic socialists. I mean, most of the religious Jews, like the seriously religious ones, tend to be conservative. And I guess there's still people that will just hate them just because of their ancestry or the influence of Judaism in other ways on society. But one reason why they've ascended so high is, first of all, Ashkenazi Jews, and we're not talking about Sephardic Jews or Asiatic Jews. Those are different groups. We're talking about Ashkenazi Jews, because they're the ones that are mainly called the Jews. And they have a higher IQ than the average person. There's a lot of right-wingers that will just reject this out of hand because they can't stand the idea that Hebrews would be superior to them in any way. But largely because Western civilization, in its perversity, deified a Jewish person and considers a Jewish person to be literally God. I mean, what the hell do you expect? If it wasn't for the Western civilization, especially the late Roman Empire, converting to Christianity, in all likelihood, the Hebrews would have gone the way of the Phoenicians. They would be extinct now. They'd just be like interbred and just diffused, like diluted down and just mixed in with everybody else. So let's see here. But yeah, getting back to their intelligence, I mean, they didn't have much choice, even though they were considered to be God's chosen people by medieval Europeans, or at least by a lot of them. Still, they resented them because they were successful, because it was sort of like this sort of a vicious circle for the Goyim, where Jews were sort of marginalized. You know, they weren't allowed to own property, for example. So they had to make a living through commerce, like money lending and like doing merchant stuff. And also they would get blamed for diseases and so forth, like the bubonic plague, Jews poisoning the wells. And so it was like the slow, stupid ones got killed off, and the smart ones who were rich, they survived better. And so it was like this forced evolution of intelligence in Ashkenazi Jews, not so much in Sephardic or Asiatic Jews, but in the Ashkenazi ones living in Europe, that there was like this forced evolution, which, according to a book called The 10,000 Year Explosion, it has one of the last chapters in the book is specifically about this forced evolution of Jews towards higher, like, intellectuality, where that's one reason why Ashkenazi Jews are so prone to getting neurological disorders like Tay-Sachs disease and this kind of thing, because of just this forced, like, it was sort of like selective breeding towards intelligence. And because they're intelligence and they have this like culture of worldly success, because even the religious ones are pretty worldly minded, that, I mean, they just rise to the top. That higher intelligence, that's one of the main, that's like the most important quality to have with regard to being successful in this world. And so, I mean, they're going to rise to the top. With regard to the military, there's not very many Jews in the military, except for maybe in Israel. Like, it seems like most Jewish people who want to fight in the military are wanting to fight in the Israeli military and not in the American military. But with regard to psychiatry or cultural anthropology is one that Sanguine Ultima missed out on here. I mean, not all early psychologists were Jews. William James was a big name in psychology, probably before Sigmund Freud got famous. He wasn't Jewish. It's just that the Jews, like in academia or commerce, this kind of stuff, they often rise to the top, partly through this culture of worldly success and partly just because, on average, statistically, they're more intelligent than the average person. So that's part of it right there. So let's see here. Let's see. Yeah, questioning their alleged genocide in World War II is illegal in most European countries, while they commit genocide with impunity on stolen land. All land is stolen land. In America, we're living on stolen land. We took it away from the Native Americans, didn't we? And we're not apologizing for it either, unless you're some lefty. Before you give a speech, you got to apologize just for the sake of virtue signaling. Committing genocide with impunity. Well, it is true that the first recorded case of attempted genocide is in the book of, Exodus and Joshua in the Old Testament, where Moses was commanding that all Canaanites be exterminated. Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that you have to admit, but blaming all Jews right? It's like the Jews did this and the Jews did that. I mean, he doesn't use the word, but still, I mean, you're better off just if people are transgressing, people are doing stuff that is not good. I mean, you call them out individually. You don't just call out what race they came from. I mean, definitely, I go along with Martin Luther King Jr. that a person should be judged by their moral character rather than by the color of their skin or just by their ethnicity. When I hit the space bar trying to get my woman's computer to monitor to light up again, it makes that weird noise. See if we can do it again. Nope. Okay. So, I mean, it's like the people that are actually doing the nefarious stuff are the ones that should be pointed out, at least. Something can be done about that. But most Jewish people, they're just being regular people. And it's like, some of them aren't like practicing Jews. I mean, some of them have converted to other religions and so forth. They're just trying to blend in, really, just being ordinary people, assimilating into whatever culture they're living in. Like in America, it's like American culture. And it was like I mentioned in the previous Q&A that there was this European guy who said that without hesitation, he would just exterminate the entire ethnicity, including people that, I mean, they're not even, it's like there's one person on the Discord server whose mother's side is Jewish, his father's side isn't. But this European guy, and he's not a practicing Jew, he's following a different system, but still this European guy would include him as under order of extermination. I don't know what percentage he would go down to. How Jewish you have to be, how Hebrew. I mean, Hebrew is actually a better term because it doesn't imply any kind of religion. And really the problematic Hebrews are the non-religious ones, the ones that have abandoned God for the sake of some kind of socialism. So anyways, getting down towards the bottom here. He's saying, can you recognize how maybe, just maybe, there's some merit in noticing their involvement? Yeah, I've noticed it. Definitely. I mean, that's not the issue. I mean, I've read like The Culture of Critique, which is very enlightening, very eye-opening anyway. Maybe I shouldn't use enlightening for a book like that, on a Dharma-oriented video, but certainly it's eye-opening. So, I mean, the Western civilization has made its bed by deifying a Jew. And, I mean, Western civilization traditionally for 1,000 years has considered a Jewish person to be God. I mean, we have made our bed and we are lying in it. So, I mean, you're better off pointing out individuals. I mean, like, what's his name? Dave Chappelle said, I mentioned this in the previous Q&A, nothing good has ever come of any sentence that contains the phrase, the Jews. You want to like call out some particular person, that's fine. But just lumping an entire ethnicity and making just really just lame accusations. They invented pornography, even though probably a lot of them are making good money publishing this stuff. I guarantee you they didn't invent it. Or saying that in Israel they're living on stolen land. I mean, name some place that hasn't been stolen from somebody else. I mean, that's just a ridiculous, that's just somebody coming up with as many reasons as they can for hating on somebody. And like I was saying in the previous Q&A, feminists can do the same thing about men. Brown people can do the same thing about white people. You can come up with really valid arguments by just being single-minded in trying to find as much shit as you can against somebody. You're going to find it. And then you just dismiss the good stuff. I mean, Jewish people of Hebrew ancestry have done some good stuff. For example, one of my first spiritual teachers was Ram Dass, previously known as Dr. Richard Albert, who was raised a Jew, even though he converted to Hinduism. But that's not good enough for like the European guy who used to be on the server who would have just included him in the genocide. Geddy Lee, damn good bass player. He's Jewish. So, yeah, I mean, just you're better off going against individuals who have actually done something wrong instead of just lumping the entire ethnicity together, including just the outer fringes of it, including people who supposedly are on your side and agree with you with regard to most stuff. So, I mean, pointing out stuff objectively, like with regard to what's happening in society and so forth, that's fine. As I specified in the previous Q&A, it's like obsessively hating on somebody. Or just even worse than that, obsessively hating on an entire demographic just because of a minority of individuals within that demographic. And that applies to not just to Hebrews. That applies to like various other ethnicities. You're better off giving people the benefit of the doubt until they screw you over somehow, or at least try to. Anyways, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, in your experience, do you think several karmic trends may come to coincide in one life stream? Looking at my present life stream, I've detected a few main karmic trends in early childhood. Some died out, others took root and continued to unfold. Well, of course, there's going to be several karmic trends. There's going to be lots and lots of karmic trends that come to coincide in one life stream. I mean, you're not just going to have one like theme to your life. There's going to be lots that you're going to like certain kinds of food. You're going to dislike certain kinds of food. You're going to like certain types of girls. You're going to dislike certain types of girls. You're going to like certain types of dogs. I mean, you're going to have like an interest in some kinds of music. Maybe you may have an interest in hiking or mountain climbing. There's all kinds of stuff. And there's all different like strands of like karmic momentum that are just sort of woven together into one individual, so to speak. So yeah, certainly. And I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Yuga'u. And I'm looking at let's see here. We're getting down towards the bottom though. Never fear, this will come to an end. I went to an ayahuasca ceremony long ago where before we began the journey, the shaman, who was a blonde lady, said that just always bear in mind there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Which may sound like kind of lame advice, but when you're turning inside out emotionally and puking into a bucket, it's useful to know. Useful to kind of bear in mind, it's kind of like the horizon to gaze at. Anyways, this next question is from Yuga'u. And let's see, I'm going to take my last drink of cold coffee. My designated primary beverage, and then crack open the emergency backup beverage. And you could... I thought it was going to foam over. It started making this sudden like a foaming sound. Okay. Yuga says, please talk more about the ignorance. How is it that people who work in medical fields, veterinarians, morticians, have all this chance to see reality as it is and gain freedom, yet fail? And yeah, I pointed out like long ago when I was a monk that a coroner can do autopsies on beautiful young women and see what they're made of, you know, and see the ultimate end state of all beautiful women. And still, it doesn't cause him to have any less desire for his wife when he comes home from work. So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a kind of dissociation. It's a compartmentalization of your mind. I mean, he's not in sexy mode, I hope. Well, he's just like doing his job, you know, cutting open this cadaver to determine the cause of death or whatever. And he's just not ripe for enlightenment yet. I mean, he's just not ready for it. I mean, there's plenty of soldiers. I mean, in ancient times, just about any able-bodied man was like, he was going to be part of the unofficial army of his people. Like, you know, there's a state of emergency. He might have to get his spear, get his shield if he had one, and go out and fight barbarians. And just because he may see, you know, fields strewn with dead bodies, doesn't mean that he's going to be filled with samvega, like this spiritual sense of urgency. I mean, it's like in ancient times, it was just death is something that's going to happen to you. So you just accept it, and that's just the part of life. It's just, you know, so what? You know, if you're going to die gloriously. That's one thing I've been thinking about relatively recently, that the urge for a glorious death has pretty much died out of Western civilization. You know, there's some Muslims who still want to die a glorious death, I suppose, by exploding in an airport or something. But like most Western men, I mean, it's like it used to be kind of a cause for shame that you'd even grow old, you know, that you're going to die in bed, you know, you're just going to kind of just degenerate. You know, they just wanted to, I mean, like among the Norse, the only way to get to Valhalla was to die in battle. And even then the Valkyries had to pick you as being particularly brave and glorious in your death. So, yeah, I mean, just because you see lots of death, it doesn't mean that you're going to apply that to yourself in a spiritual sense and use that as like a motivation for striving for liberation, when most of these people don't have liberation as an option. They're oblivious to the very potential or option of liberation. I mean, they're just completely in samsaric mode. That like striving for enlightenment is I mean, it's not on their radar at all. They've never been exposed to it culturally, except for maybe, you know, they'll watch some YouTube video that's some new age person that just makes the whole thing seem ridiculous or something. And then, you know, they're not gonna follow that. They just assume materialistic science or whatever it is, whatever their culture tells them is real, that's real. So, in a way, it's culturally conditioned ignorance, and also in a way, it's just most people are not spiritually mature enough to really take the idea of striving for enlightenment or striving for liberation from samsara, striving for liberation from the wheel of birth and death. That, I mean, it's not encouraged, and they just really don't see the point to it. Even a lot of nominal Buddhists are that way. So I think I'm just going to move on to Yuga-U's next question, which is, how is it that desire can be so strong to make us come into being, even according to Nagarjuna? Mention of Nagarjuna, I'll put on the fez, the Majjhimaka fez. Take it back off again. Okay, I'll just start the question over again. How is it that desire can be so strong to makes us come into being, even according to Nagarjuna, there is nothing there in a first place? Well, desire doesn't have to be strong to make some being come into being. That just the slightest desire, the most subtle desire, creates a very slight existence, some crude existence. It's like maybe there is a first existence. Going back to the very first question in this Q&A, that there may be some very primordial kind of proto-existence as a sentient being. Then in that case, the desire would just be the slight wisp, the slightest hint of desire, the slightest hint of, I am. I want to stay alive. I want to promote my existence. I want to keep living, this kind of thing. I want to find food. I want to find a mate. And it doesn't take, any desire is enough to cause some kind of being to come into existence. And then by the time you're up into the mammal realm, you're like a primate mammal, then you're going to have stronger desires, which is going to lead to this more concrete, more vitality, more of like a comprehensive sort of cosmos that you're living in. So, but then he throws in Nagarjuna. There is nothing there in the first place. Well, it's all dependently co-arising. So, whether it ultimately is real or not is kind of irrelevant. It's dependently co-arising, and trying to explain dependent co-arising, especially just as a subsidiary to a question. Yeah, the Buddha himself figured he wasn't going to succeed, and he was correct, because pretty much nobody understands dependent co-arising, because it's such a mind-blowing concept that, it's like trying to understand a reality that has no firm foundation. It's sort of free-floating and just mutually conditioning. And, even each mutual condition is itself mutually conditioned. So the whole thing is sort of arising spontaneously, in a sense, from the uncarved block of marble, because the statues are in there. But that's a tough one. The second part of it, the Nagarjuna part, is tough. How is it desire can be so strong to make us come into being? The slightest desire is going to create some sort of being that's desiring. It's going to be just this wispy little, this ephemeral kind of semi-being. The slightest desire will cause the slightest individual sort of. I'm trying to say sort of and so to speak at the same time. It's trying to come out as sort of speak. So let's see. I'll just go to the next question. This is from Romeo. Romeo says, you put a lot of thought, time, and effort into your Q&As with little to no compensation. Is doing them a labor of love in which you get some intrinsic reward, or do you do them with some reluctance? No, I actually get satisfaction from doing a Q&A. It's one of my main spiritual practices, I think, is doing these Q&A videos. Just doing videos in general. Even doing the fish videos is, it's kind of a spiritual practice, I suppose. Yeah, I get some intrinsic reward. I'm earning merit, I suppose, by helping people to understand something about Dhamma. I might earn a little bit of demerit by throwing seeds of doubt into devout Buddhists or some such, or by blaspheming, speaking heresy. But no, I'm definitely doing it voluntarily. Nobody's forcing me to do this. I wouldn't do it if I didn't want to. So I'm fine with this. This is all right. I'm good with this. It takes several hours every Saturday, pretty much, but this is like my spiritual practice, or it's a major part of it anyhow. So I'm just going to move on to Romeo's second question, which is kind of an interesting one. With so many people following your insights and wisdom, do you ever feel like a sort of guru? If so, do you relish this feeling or find displeasure in it? Well, I mean, according to the Hindus, there's two kinds of guru. You've got the Upaguru and you've got the Sat Guru. The Sat Guru is God personified. The Sat Guru is a fully enlightened being. They're just God in a human body. Like a lot of people considered Neem Karoli Baba up there. And then you got the Upaguru, who could be anybody really that is sort of helping somebody along the path. Ram Dass denied being enlightened. He considered himself to be an Upaguru. He was fine with that. I mean, you can see a dog licking its balls, and if you get some sort of insight from that, that dog is your guru. At least a temporary Upaguru, just giving you helping you with some kind of little insight along the way. So that's fine. I've got no problem with that. Being a kind of guru. I think guru just means like a teacher. I mean, literally means heavy. In Pali, garu, it means like heavy. So you're like the heavy hitter who's teaching things or something. But the weird thing is, with regard to being, not so much being a guru, but what kind of strikes me more than that is becoming an egregore. And I mentioned egregores earlier on. It's like a pagan idea of a being whose existence is conditioned by the beliefs of all these other beings. That they're kind of strengthening your existence in a certain way. And I noticed this even when I was a kid to some degree. When I was a kid, if I was surrounded by people that had high expectations of me, I would do better than if I was surrounded by people who had low expectations of me. Like, I didn't do very good in sports in school, and people just expected me to do bad in sports in school, and I didn't do very well. It was just sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of a deal. Like, away from school, I did a lot better in sports, playing sandlot ball, that kind of stuff. And also, I remember I had one sort of semi-girlfriend. We never actually went to bed together, but she was like legally mentally ill. She was getting checks from the government. She got a Section 8 out of the Army that Corporal Klinger and MASH kept trying for and couldn't get. She got it. So she was getting checks from the government for being like too mentally out of it to like serve effectively in the armed forces. And she was pretty nutty, I have to admit, more so than the average female. She was in the danger zone. But she had a very high opinion of me for some reason. And when I was with her, I could like master stuff. I could just run a pool table if she was watching. It was weird because her belief that I was, better than the average guy somehow helped me to be better than the average guy somehow. And I think to some degree that, like, when I'm doing these videos, people watching me and considering me to be this sage helps me to be this way. However I happen to be, however I am, it's like people that watch me and they're perceiving me are sort of reinforcing their own, in a way, they're kind of projecting this opinion onto me, which is sticking to some degree. So I feel like I'm kind of an egregore. I mean, I'm not purely an egregore. I would continue to exist, such as I am, without doing videos and all that. Like, my woman's high opinion of me also is sort of uplifted me in life. Like, people loving you and respecting and admiring you is a blessing. It's like one of the greatest blessings you can have is for someone to see you at your worst and still just love you wholeheartedly and bless you. It's very uplifting. It definitely has a beneficial effect. My father was that way towards me. I mean, he was very proud of me. He always believed in me, so to speak, which was very helpful in life. So I guess I answered that question. So I'm just going to move on to Romeo's third question. Do you ever see an episode number where you will call it quits and put your Q&As to rest? No, I don't think it's going to be once I reach a certain number. I mean, eventually, if it just runs its course and nobody's coming up with any good questions anymore, I mean, it might be time to put it to rest then. Or just something else comes along. You know, I pretty much stopped writing my blog when these Q&As started becoming more regular. And so it may be that just as these Q&As replaced my writing the blog on the weekends when I wasn't working, something else may come along, but I don't know what it would be. I'm not planning on it. But I don't have any specific number, 6 gorillion or something. When I get to that number, I guess it couldn't be 6 gorillion because that's not prime. It'd have to be some kind of prime number, I suppose. But yeah. That's the way it is. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Quasator. And I told you this is going to be a long one. We're already well over 2 hours. Quasator says, the attenuation of ill will and sensual desire is associated with the sakadagami. Can Putujana achieve similar results without right view? Well, of course they can. I mean, attenuation just means making it less. So, of course, you can reduce ill will and sensual desire without having right view. I mean, Christians do it, like Christian saints. Some of these Catholic, like medieval European Catholic saints, from a Buddhist point of view, they had this really egregious wrong view. I mean, they deified a Jewish person, for starters. They believed in an eternal soul. They believed in the capital G God. They believed that you only have one life. There is no rebirth except into heaven or hell, which is going to last forever. This is, from a Buddhist point of view, they had just a really wrong view, but nevertheless, they very much attenuated their ill will and sensual desire to the point of some of them really becoming genuine saints. So certainly a Putujana can attenuate ill will and sensual desire without right view. In fact, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of becoming fully enlightened without right view, so-called right view, which is essentially official Buddhist doctrine. Like I mentioned in the previous Q&A, I think it was. I mean, you can have just absurd, from a Western point of view, just absurd views and still become enlightened. Neem Karoli Baba, up there, he worshipped Hanuman, the monkey god, but he was just as far beyond us as we are beyond monkeys. At least. I consider Neem Karoli Baba to be a kind of spiritual Superman. But he worshipped a monkey god. So I think right view is something that dogmatic Theravada Buddhists put a lot of emphasis on, that I really don't think it's nearly as essential. I mean, to have right view with regard to how to practice can be definitely very useful. And having right view with regard to just abstaining from absurd wrong views. But once you get to a certain point, if you're practicing, you're detaching from all views. Like the Atthakavagga says, no view. In fact, the word that's usually translated as wrong view in Pali is just diti, which just means view. So originally, the Buddha was just saying, don't have any view. And then later, after early Buddhist philosophers were cooking up all this philosophy, they're saying, well, what he says is, what he meant was, you shouldn't have any wrong views, which just flings the door wide open to all these right views that we are promulgating. But the Buddha said, don't have any view. DT. None of it. And literally, view or DT just means what is seen. So, I guess I'll just move on to Quasator's second question here, which is, do you notice a significant weakening of craving and aversion in everyday life after your time as a monk? Yeah, although it's difficult to know with certainty how much of it is caused by my having been a monk and how much of it is caused by me being more than 30 years older. So it's hard to say how weak my craving and aversion would be if I had never been a monk. I assume it'd be stronger, but still, like when I'm at work on a forklift in just this hectic chaos, that I'm cussing a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if I cuss more than anybody else at work. There was one guy named James that cussed more than me, and he quit because he was going through a divorce or something and didn't want to deal with the hectic chaos, I guess, in addition to the divorce. And I missed him partly just because he cussed more than I did. And I'm not cussing directly at anybody. I'm not like cussing people out. It's just like F-bombs while I'm like trying to manipulate freight. And sometimes it's not working out correctly, or, just somebody, I mean, even if somebody does something stupid, they're like park, they just pull right in front of me and park when I'm trying to do something, that kind of thing. I might be cussing them, but still I'm not cussing them out. I'm just sort of muttering profanities under my breath. But let's get back to the question, shall we? Do you notice a significant weakening of craving and aversion in everyday life after your time as a monk? Yeah, I mean, especially my cravings, my aversions for some things and my cravings for almost anything are much weaker now than they were when I was, say, a college student. Which is, in a way, it's kind of almost a shame, really, that I find this really lovely woman, and I don't have this tempestuous passion that I had when I was 18. But hell, it's like I'm just too old for the tempestuous, passionate romance stuff, it seems like. Except for every once in a while. But it's not like this perpetual phenomenon that's just going from day to day, like it was like the first time I had some hottie girlfriend when I was in college. So, do you notice a significant weakening in craving? Yeah, but to what extent it's caused by me just getting older, and to what extent it's caused by my Dhamma practice for 30 years is hard to say with precision. But I'm sure that my being a monk, especially the detachment from pleasures, like food and just comfort in general, I'm living much more comfort than I would if I were living alone. Now, women and gay guys, notoriously, they like everything really comfy and like tasteful and pretty and everything. If it was just me living alone, there'd be like bare walls. I'd be sleeping on some mat on the floor, maybe just have towels up instead of curtains covering the windows, that kind of stuff. I'd be fine with that. It's like a meme. A guy who just, his living room, all he's got is like a TV, a gaming console, and a couch. That's it. Just bare walls, bare everything. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. I mean, it was kind of like that before I became a monk, but now it's more ingrained through force of habit. Just a kind of almost disdain for comfort. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also from Quaesitor. If we've lived countless lifetimes, what are the odds that this is the one that enlightens us? Well, I mean, going with statistics, it'd be like an infinitesimally small percentage that this would be our final lifetime. But the fact that we've gotten as far as we have so that we are actually thinking about Dhamma and to some degree practicing Dhamma, that would really up the odds, but still it'd probably be less than 1%. Just going with what percentage of Dhamma practitioners actually become fully enlightened, it's pretty small. It's minuscule. So, I mean, your odds are better than nothing. I mean, even going with the idea that there is actually such a thing as enlightenment within a samsaric context, which I am certainly not persuaded of. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cherzaskaz. And Cherzaskaz is asking about ignorance. He says, I've read Yugu's comment and have to ask, do people who see decay, agony, and death on a daily basis fail to realize that we are ultimately all dead and lots of things are just pointless? They have very clear proof of that, or they fail to realize that maybe we will be born again and again. They don't have any proof of that, though. Well, they don't have very clear proof that a lot of things are just pointless, because whether something is pointless or not, that's a value judgment. That's not something objective. That if something is pointless or not, it depends on your perception of it. And of course, someone who's thoroughly immersed in samsara, taking it completely seriously, they're attributing meaning to everything and a point pretty much to everything, at least to like whatever it is that is their main focus. So, I mean, that's meaning is samsara, really. So let's see here. What exactly is the question? People who see decay, agony, and death on a daily basis, let's say an ancient Roman soldier on campaign, fail to realize that we are ultimately all dead. Well, yeah, I don't think that they would see that, because pretty obviously from an empirical point of view, we're still alive. We are breathing and moving around and making noise. And lots of things are just pointless. Again, that just depends on your point of view. So, or they fail to realize that maybe we will be born again and again. Well, the ancient Greeks and Romans, they just thought that we went to Hades, just like this shadowy, dark underworld where you're just kind of sleepwalking in this daze. You're never fully awake anymore. That kind of thing. So, I mean, in a way, they were kind of existentialists who accepted the idea that so long as you're alive, you play the game and you go for glory and honor and that kind of thing. And it works. I mean, it worked at the time. It might not work very well anymore now that Western civilization has become thoroughly feminized. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure if women really have a concept of honor, other than maybe like ancient Roman women, or, I mean, when women have had a sense of honor, it was mainly like sexual chastity. That was their honor. They weren't sluts. But aside from that, honor is, I'm sure there's some women who have a concept of honor, but I think it seems that most women, it's just sort of foreign to their way of thinking. But I'm digressing big time, possibly getting myself into a little bit of trouble too. So, people who see decay, agony, and death on a daily basis fail to realize that we are ultimately all dead. Well, ultimately, I wouldn't say we're all dead. We might not be ultimately alive, but we're not. I mean, that's just part of the dualism, alive and dead. You know, if one of them falls, both of them fall, because the whole duality collapses. So a lot of things are just pointless. I mean, ultimately, everything is. I mean, it's just conditionally with a point, virtually. So that's kind of getting into existentialism. They have very clear proof. Yeah, I don't think they really do have very clear proof of it. Unless Trzaska's is seeing something I'm missing. Or they fail to realize that maybe we may be born again and again. Some of them, like the ancient Dacians, believed in reincarnation. Some people believe in reincarnation other than Indians. Some Native American tribes believe in reincarnation. That kind of thing. But I mean, it's just the animal instinct to stay alive really is in the driver's seat. And philosophical speculations about what happens after you die is really of secondary importance at best to most people. I mean, you're alive, you're an animal body, you've got animal instincts keeping you alive. You know, it's like fear of death is one of the most basic instincts. That's root chakra right there. So, yeah, I mean, most people are just semi-awake and just living kind of animalistic lives, and it's just every animal has this instinct to just be alive and keep being alive as long as possible. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rakasa. And this is kind of an interesting question. I don't think that anyone has asked, even though it is sort of an essay question, of which there have been several this evening. Rakasa says, how do you think the concept of Pacheka Buddhas arose? if you read Tibetan and East Asian texts on the different sects, they usually subdivide Hinayana into Shravakayana and Pacheka Buddhayana. I'm aware both of these words are in the Pali Canon, Sawaka and Pacheka Buddha. And the use of Sawaka, at least, makes sense. It originally just meant disciple without a derisive connotation. Probably most Theravadins and Sarvastivadins called themselves that, but it seems to me that Pacheka Buddha is a very specific technical term, a Sammasambuddha that opted not to teach anyone. It seems automatically impossible in this age since Gautama Buddha already taught the Dhamma, and it would be odd to strive for it in a future age, vowing to become fully enlightened, but for absolutely nobody's benefit. Could it be that there were pre-Mahayana Buddhists using the term Pacheka Buddha in a different sense? Well, definitely. Let's see. I mean, this is a complicated question, another complicated, like compound question with more than one question mark. So it starts and ends with question marks. The first question, how do you think the concept of Pacheka Buddhayana arose? Well, I mean, I'm not sure how the Mahayana concepts arose, but the Theravada concept of Pacheka Buddhas, it was a fully enlightened being who arises when there is no Buddhism in this world. It's in between Buddha sasanas. Then that's the only time you can have Pacheka Buddhas. And so I think that the original concept of Pacheka Buddhas arose as a way of explaining enlightened beings before the Buddhist time. Like the Buddha would say in some of his suttas, it's like enlightened beings in the past, enlightened beings now, and enlightened beings in the future. They all do such and such. And so before the cult of the Buddhas, the 7 Buddhas or the 28 Buddhas came along, that there had to be this idea of, the Buddha was saying there was enlightened beings before him. So who were they? And so I think it's good chance that it was the Pacheka Buddha was a kind of fully enlightened being who became self-enlightened. They didn't have to be taught by some other enlightened teacher. And see, I think I just confused myself in the middle of a sentence. Forgot how the very beginning of the sentence started. But anyways, the Buddha would talk about enlightened beings of the past. And in a way, it was a way of explaining how you had enlightened beings before the Buddha came along, who started the wheel of Dharma rolling, probably before the later cult of the multitude of Buddhas came along. That would be my guess as to where the idea of Pacheka Buddhas came from. It was just an idea of the Buddha himself admitting he wasn't the first enlightened being, that there were enlightened beings before him. And so people just kind of came up with this mythology that there are fully enlightened beings like the Buddha who existed before the time of the Buddha. They just didn't start Buddhism because they were hermits, or they just could not articulate Dhamma the way a Sammasambuddha articulates Dhamma. And according to the legend, the Buddha himself almost became a Pacheka Buddha because he figured nobody would understand dependent co-arising. And then Brahma, the personification of ultimate reality for the Vedic Brahmins, had to come down from heaven and beg the Buddha to teach a system that would ridicule Brahma himself. So then along came the Mahayana Buddhists, who just completely distort the meaning of all kinds of words, including bodhisattva. There are a lot of Mahayana Buddhists who think you can have a fully enlightened bodhisattva when the original meaning of a bodhisattva was someone who is destined for enlightenment, and they weren't enlightened yet. They weren't a Buddha yet. And also Pacheka Buddhas, it's like you read Mahayana sutras and the Buddha has got retinues of hundreds or even thousands of Pacheka Buddhas attending his sermons, which, according to the original meaning, or at least the early Buddhist, Theravadan interpretation of Pacheka Buddha, which literally means for oneself Buddha, that, you don't have Pacheka Buddhas when there is Dhamma in this, Buddhism in this world, when there is a Buddha sasana that is still alive and functioning in this world, you don't have Pacheka Buddhas. But then Mahayana comes a few hundred years later, you got hundreds of Pacheka Buddhas attending the Buddhist discourses. And fully enlightened bodhisattvas besides. There's one little quibble here. I wouldn't say that, let's see, where is it? Vowing to become a fully enlightened, but for absolutely nobody's benefit. I wouldn't go so far as to say a Pacheka Buddha is to absolutely nobody's benefit. First of all, they're raising the consciousness center of gravity in the world, even if they remain silent. Secondly, they go for alms round, and the people who are offering alms to them are gathering up treasures in heaven by supporting these Pacheka Buddhas, even though they're not teaching anything necessarily. Still, they are of benefit to the world, just through their existence and their effect on the level of consciousness in the world, and also just offering people or providing people with the opportunity to see them and even to offer alms to them. And I guess Devadatta, the Buddhist version, Buddhist equivalent of Judas Iscariot, who tried to kill the Buddha, tried to take over Buddhism from his cousin Gautama Buddha, that he's roasting in hell right now, but at some future age, he's going to become a Pacheka Buddha, according to Theravada Buddhist tradition. So, anyway, yeah, my working hypothesis on the origin of Pacheka Buddhas is just a kind of more or less mythological explanation for how you could have enlightened beings before the Buddha, and not like in some vast distant age like some previous Buddha, but maybe just even like a few decades before the time of the Buddha, or just a century or two before the time of the Buddha. You know, he seems to have mentioned that there were enlightened beings just, out there, that he wasn't the only one. At least that's how you can interpret some of the suttas, where he's talking about, the enlightened beings of the past, enlightened beings of the present, enlightened beings of the future. They all agree, or they all do such and such. And that's one way of interpreting that. So that is my guess, although, of course, it is a heretical guess, because I'm not taking the whole idea of Pacheka Buddhas very seriously, because I just don't think that way. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Dhamma River. And Dhamma River says, what are the 3 best and the 3 worst countries to ordain from the following list? Myanmar, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, Malaysia, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, and China. The 3 best, well, if Myanmar weren't in the midst of a civil war right now, Myanmar might be the best. It's like the most devoutly Buddhist country in the world, probably. But it's getting a visa and all that might be not very easy now. So let's just leave out Myanmar. So I'd have to say it'd be like Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Cambodia would be the 3 best countries for ordaining, especially if you're going to be ordained as a Theravada Buddhist. And Dhamma River doesn't specify exactly what you can be ordained as. I mean, he's got Japan on the list, South Korea, and there's not much Theravada going on in Japan and South Korea. That's like Mahayana Buddhism. So was he including Mahayana Buddhism as an option here? But definitely China would be a bad country to be ordained. Yeah, don't be ordained in China. That is my advice to you. Let's see, Vietnam is also a communist country that probably doesn't have much respect for Buddhism, although I guess there are Buddhist monasteries in Vietnam. Laos is another one where it's like a Buddhist country that there's really not much Dhamma going on there, largely because of the communist government. Let's see. But also South Korea and Japan, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of Theravada Buddhism there either. But I'm not exactly sure if Dhamma River had the door open to being ordained as a Zen monk, in which case South Korea or Japan would probably be the way to go. Not China, though. Malaysia and Indonesia have a considerable amount of reputable Theravada Buddhist monasteries and Dhamma centers. So those are kind of theoretical options. But I'd stay away from the repressive communist regimes. Even though China technically isn't really communist anymore, it's more fascistic now. And if I was going to be ordained as a Theravada Buddhist monk, I wouldn't go to Japan for it. If I couldn't go to the three that I mentioned, or Myanmar, if you can't go to one of the Theravada Buddhist countries, then Indonesia or Malaysia would probably be fairly good for ordination. There are some good places in Indonesia and Malaysia. And I'm just going to move on to Dhamma River's next question. And this could be a 3-hour long one. This will be the first 3-hour long Q&A in quite a while, although I have gotten up to like 3.5 hours, and I don't think I'm going to quite get that far. But anyways, Dhamma River's second question is as follows. Liberals, this is an essay question too, so we've got quite a few of them. Yeah, this is quite the essay question. Okay, he says, liberals in Canada, fueled by their Oedipus hate towards Trump, have just elected Mark Carney as their new prime minister. Millions of unresolved conflicts between children and their baby boomer fathers are currently manifesting as Trump derangement syndrome. Their blind hatred keeps them from seeing the broader consequences of their actions. For the first time in the history of Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, has a governor of a central bank been elected as leader. Liberals are getting back at Trump by selecting the equivalent of Alan Greenspan as their leader. Let that sink in for a minute. Okay. I'm letting it sink in. Although, probably waiting a whole minute is kind of excessive. Let's just let it sink in a little bit more. All right, I guess that's enough. We got to keep the flow going here. So then he says, what do you think is the main factor that leads leftists to be completely incapable of critical thinking? All they know, think, and imagine comes from whatever the media tells them. There is nothing liberal about their behavior or logic anymore. It's just mob thinking and virtue signaling. Ironically, they have become what they criticize. Even when they try to investigate any issue, they only check their mainstream sources. And let's see, before I answer this question, it seems to me that Australia is doing even worse now. I guess they just overwhelmingly elected this left-wing government, although I haven't been able to find much about it in the news as of yet. But I don't know what the deal is with the Australians either. I mean, they used to be kind of like Chads. They had a reputation for it anyway. Then they gave all the guns away, and now they're just voting as communist as they can get. Practically, the country was turned into a multitude of concentration camps during the Wuhan flu debacle. But anyways, let's get back to Canada, shall we? So liberals in Canada, fueled by their Oedipus hate towards Trump. Yeah, I think part of it is just Trump with his talk about, putting tariffs on Canada that were mainly just for the purpose of balancing the tariff situation. That Canada had tariffs that were like 200%, like dairy products, that kind of stuff, against America. And then Trump does some tariffs against Canada. And of course, partly fueled by the mainstream media, it's just outrageous. And then of course, Trump is like calling Justin Trudeau the governor of the state of Canada, that kind of stuff, just openly mocking and insulting the leader of Canada, which is sort of indirectly mocking and insulting Canadians to some degree. So I don't think it's entirely like an Oedipus complex, just Trump is like a father figure that Canadian baby boomers hate. Although it may be a large part of it. I'm not an expert on the situation. It's just that what I've been told is that Trump and his tariffs especially, and also just talking about annexing Canada and so forth, just sort of galvanized a kind of resistance against the right, which was sort of pro-Trump. Anyways, let's see. The question is, like, in the second paragraph here, what do you think is the main factor that leads leftists to be completely incapable of critical thinking? Well, you've got like two different levels of leftists. You got the people that are like leaders that are actually coming up with the ideas that they are then promulgating to the followers who just eat it up with a spoon. So you've got like academics, for example, who still, after a century of stagnant and failed economies, totalitarianism, and occasional genocide, still prefer Marxism or some kind of socialism to a capitalistic model. And I think in that case, they're so in their head, they just like what sounds good in theory. Everybody's equal. You know, it's all fair and just, even though you have to persecute or like discriminate against the successful so that the unsuccessful can catch up, that kind of thing. But still, it's just sort of, they like what sounds good in theory more than what looks good, what actually works in ugly, dirty truth. Like in ugly empirical reality, they just don't want to accept that. They can think up some better system, which doesn't actually work, but it doesn't deter them from continually insisting upon it. It just goes against human nature, but they just cannot comprehend this. And then, like the lower down, the majority of people who vote leftist, you know, the hysterical mob or whatever, I mean, they're just, in a way, they're just following this culture. I mean, it's like, to some degree, the new left in modern America and Canada and so forth, they kind of have the same niche as the Christians of the Roman Empire. You know, it's like this people that were just hysterical in their beliefs, completely intolerant of anyone who disagreed with them, and who would teach love and acceptance, but only for people who agreed with them. That people who didn't agree with them were just evil and should be just abolished. So long as the left continues to have control over most of the media, you're going to have the sheep, the followers, who are going to just assume that, you know, the main voices that they are hearing coming from higher up are telling them the truth, even though it's pretty regular for these truths to be eventually shown to be the opposite of truth. And then still it's like, well, okay, maybe they were wrong about that, but still Trump is evil, and like anyone who supports Trump is a Nazi, and it's all based on racism and hatred. And it's just, they're told this over and over again, and it's just this mutually conditioning kind of a huge echo chamber. And there's some of that on the right too, definitely. But it really is a kind of, it's like a cult. It seems to me that the left really has left any kind of common sense behind in favor of, I mean, it's like, it's so weird now that the left is just wholeheartedly embracing positions that the overwhelming majority of Americans reject. Like getting rid of, like deporting violent, criminal, illegal alien gang members. That this has become like the latest battle for the left, is they're trying to prevent any of them from being kicked out, except through some lengthy process of getting warrants and all these like hearings and so forth, just trying to slam the brakes. You know, you've got this violent gang member, illegal alien. He's called, you know, Maryland Father, you know, kicked out of America, sent to some prison. I mean, El Salvador, he's an El Salvadorian citizen. And it's like, it's sort of like religious thinking, where the religious mind can believe anything, no matter how absurd it is to someone who is not indoctrinated into the cult. And at this point, they've been believing it for so long and with such vehemence that, I mean, they would just be utterly mortified and crushed. A lot of them would, to finally realize that this whole time they've been believing this essentially like cynical, artificially induced insanity imposed upon them by higher ups. Some of the higher ups actually believe this stuff for reasons I already mentioned. They prefer the beautiful theory to the ugly truth. But the ugly truth is going to win sooner or later. I mean, you can't fight against reality, not even empirical reality, and win. Maybe you can hold your own for a while, but it's going to collapse. And that's one reason why civilizations collapse, is just because of this kind of shit. America, or Western civilization in general, is definitely in decline. So, I guess I answered that question. I don't know. I guess I did. Answered it enough anyways. So now it's time to move on to an easy, relatively short question. Oh, I guess it's not so short. It's also a paragraph question. Have you ever read a book, A Guided Tour of Hell by Buddhist teacher Samuel Berchols? If yes, can you please provide your opinion of the book? If you have not read it yet, I absolutely recommend it to you, and anyone else reading this comment. Is packed with fantastic Buddhist teachings of mental states that lead sentient beings to hell. We can learn to avoid developing these mental habits. It's about a near-death experience by the author where he went to hell even though he was the biggest skeptic, and paraphrasing, he always considered the Buddhist teachings on the different realms of existence to be for peasants until he saw it for himself. Okay, so the actual question is here up at the top. Have you ever read the book, A Guided Tour of Hell by Buddhist teacher Samuel Berchols? I can't even remember hearing of the existence of Samuel Berchols. So no, I have not read the book, A Guided Tour of Hell. In fact, most Buddhist literature not written by, Buddhist literature that isn't like Pali texts, I tend not to have read very much of. I don't watch Dhamma videos much. It's, yeah. So I haven't even read anything by Stephen Batchelor, really. So I've read a few books by monks, but books written by Buddhist lay people. I read one book by Joseph Goldstein, his first famous book. I actually read a couple books by Jack Kornfield. One was Living Buddhist Masters, written back in the 1970s, I think. And one was A Path with Heart, just because I happened to be somewhere where the book was there. It was about the most interesting thing to read, so I read it. But for the most part, I just don't read this kind of stuff. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And I'm going to scroll down to see, yeah, only 2 more questioners. So, yeah, we're over 3 hours already. First, this next question is from Philalethes. And Philalethes says, I get the feeling that watchfulness of the mind, your third gear, is more effective for Westerners than traditional nostril watching, since we're so caught up in our heads as opposed to the body. At least in my case, the nostril method never did much, whereas thought mindfulness is effective meditation. Thoughts? Well, it is a more effective and more abstract kind of meditation, and a lot of people just can't do it very well. They prefer something that they can actually feel, something they're more in their body, I guess. And so it's just more obvious, easier for them to watch the breath, the air going in and out of their nostrils, than to just sit there not thinking and try to catch their thoughts. Because, a lot of people, they just identify with their thoughts, especially guys, I guess. And they can start to panic when they stop thinking. It feels like their ego is dissolving. So for various reasons, this shikantaza meditation, I'm trying to turn the computer screen back on, but it's not working. There we go. I guess. No, it just turned back off again. Oh, there it went. It turned back on again. Okay, getting back to, I think in Zen it's called shikantaza, where you're just watching the mind and you just catch any thought that arises. It's like I think it's the Dhammapada commentary. there's that method of just you close off the five senses and just watch the sixth sense of the mind, and just whatever comes out, you catch it. So, I mean, it's just for whatever reason, it tends to be a more advanced method than just mindfulness of the breath. And you can even simplify mindfulness of the breath more by just counting your breaths, 1 through 5, then 1 through 6, then 1 through 7, up to 1 through 10, and then back to 1 through 5, which is just grinding away at the ABCs. But a lot of people, they need that at the beginning. It's just a kind of like mental push-ups or something. Calisthenics is strengthening their concentration. So if you can do third gear better than you can do anapana, if you can just watch the mind without thinking more easily than you can watch the breath going out of your nostrils, then go for it, because it is, in general, it can be a more advanced method. Although, as I've said, Anapana can take you all the way to fourth jhana according to Theravada Buddhist tradition. And so I'm just going to move on to Phil Lathy's next question, which is, from a Buddhist or even personal point of view, what is your attitude to fantasy? Recently, I have been attacked by this feeling that the world of lived experience is like an alien planet compared to the world of the fantasy, as in what we expect it to be and how we visualize it in our mind. It makes one think of the Orthodox Christians and how they say that fantasy and even ordinary perception itself is demonic. More and more I feel that true happiness and stillness relies on a life devoid of fantasy, whereas all of our culture, especially since advertising, seems to be organized to conduct psychic attacks to manipulate and flare up our fantasy through eroticism and fear-based techniques. Well, I did a lot of fantasizing as a monk. One of my favorite fantasies was being a Roman emperor, like coming along around the time of 360 AD, like right when Julian the Apostate was coming to power, and I'd know what I know now so that I could teach the Romans, how to get technology, tell them about the number 0, decimal numerical system and that kind of stuff. I used to think about that kind of stuff a lot. Not nearly so much anymore. But so at first when I read this question, I thought he was talking about like the literary genre of fantasy, but he's talking about fantasizing. So a lot of time you're sitting there meditating, and then you realize that for the past 15 minutes you've been fantasizing. And from a Buddhist point of view, yeah, you're better off not doing that. You should just be here now, be here in the present moment. Don't be fantasizing about being a Roman emperor, or being in bed with some female, or being a rock star, or that kind of stuff. I mean, you're wasting your time, essentially. In a way, you're creating some little life, sort of like a dream, or that kind of thing, like was mentioned earlier. Like one thing I've done is, if I'm reading a novel, like reading Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens while in a cave in Burma, sometimes while reading the novel, I'd fantasize about like being a character in the novel and how I would deal with Nicholas Nickleby and all that. So from a Buddhist point of view, yeah, you're better off not doing that stuff. It's just natural that people do it. I do it sometimes, fantasizing. But yeah, I mean, for like, especially a monk, if you're striving for enlightenment, then you should just be right here, right now, and not really thinking about other places or the future or the past, being someone else, being under different circumstances than you actually are. That sort of thing is just proliferating more samsara. Even if you're thinking about doing virtuous stuff, I mean, at least you're getting a little bit of merit by sort of aspiring or admiring virtue, doing the right thing, that kind of thing. But ultimately, even merit is for lay people, and monks shouldn't even be trying to earn merit. That they need to leave behind good karma and bad karma. So let's see, what is the actual question? What is your attitude to fantasy? From a Buddhist point of view, it's essentially a waste of time. It's wallowing in samsara. But it's just human nature and people do it. There's a lot of Walter Middies walking around in this world. So I'm just going to move on to Phil Lathy's third question, which is the second to last question. Outside of the Sutta Nipata, are there any suttas that you consider more profound or superior to the Dhammapada? Well, the Dhammapada really is not a wealth of profundity. The Dhammapada is just individual verses, like little aphorisms that are teaching like basics of Buddhist philosophy. I mean, there's profundity in the very first verse of the Dhammapada that, it's all mind made, that kind of thing. But I mean, you can find profundity in the Dhammapada, but most of the profound stuff is elsewhere. There's a lot of profundity in the Samyutta Nikaya. There's a lot of profundity in like the Udana. Like the Bahia Sutta is profound. A lot of profundity in the Majjhima Nikaya. So yeah, you can find profundity, like more profundity than you find in the Dhammapada, which is really a relatively late work. Like in G.C. Pandey's Studies in the Origins of Buddhism, he doesn't even really mention the Dhammapada. It's apparently the Dhammapada was kind of a late addition to the Pali Canon. And you read the Mahayana Dhammapada, and it's almost completely different from the Theravada Dhammapada. At least what is passed off as the Mahayana Dhammapada, which is more derived from the Udana and the Sutta Nipata, verses taken from those texts in Pali, than it is from the actual Pali text, the Dhammapada. Or as the Burmese call it, the Dhammapada. So, yeah, there's lots of suttas outside the Sutta Nipata that I consider more profound or superior to the Dhammapada. Dighanaka Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, central portion, or like, let's see, what would it be? Maybe the central portion of the Sakapanya Sutta of the Digha Nikaya. Even the Brahmajala Sutta is profound when you think of almost every possibility is ruled out. A lot of texts in the Udana are profound, etc. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question. This is from PSA. And PSA asked two other questions. One of them was one of these kind of a joke question where he's just using as many big words as he can. So I answered that in the comments. And then his second question was just, what's up? So this is up, I guess. This right here, this is up. And this is his third question, but it's really the only question that I'm going to really take the trouble to answer here. And that is, if someone completely new to Buddhism asked for your advice on where to go for their first meditation retreat, where will you direct them? I would direct them to the Tathagata Meditation Center in San Jose, California, because it's a good meditation center that's run pretty much like meditation centers in Burma. It's run by a Vietnamese group that have become devotees of the Mahasi tradition. First, they were devotees of Mahasi U Pandita, who has passed away, and but still, they invite Seados of the Mahasi tradition to come to California and lead retreats there, and it's cheap. You're not paying $5,000 for a weekend like you might at some place like Spirit Rock, and you're just paying enough to pay for the electricity and the food you're eating, really. And it's very well run. It's a good place, although you have to be careful because there's skunks. There's persimmon trees on the grounds. I almost got sprayed by a skunk there once because they come out at night to eat the persimmons that fall out of the trees, and then you suddenly happen upon one and you can startle them, and then bad things can happen. But yeah, definitely the Tathagata Meditation Center in San Jose, California. Although, of course, I don't know everything there is to know about a lot of other places, but stay away from like the woke Dhamma centers that charge a lot of money for their retreats and that kind of thing. And I guess we're done. By golly, less than 3.5 hours anyhow. And so, like I should always say at the beginning and always say at the end, if you got any questions you think I can answer, specifically or especially if they're like Dhamma-oriented questions or philosophical questions, especially having to do with Theravada Buddhism or early Buddhism. Buddhism in general is fair game, although I'm certainly no authority on Tibetan Buddhism in particular. Eastern philosophy in general, Western philosophy, Burma, monasticism, just aspects of like Dhamma practice, like meditation, that kind of stuff, I'm generally fairly good at answering. But, and please, like, try to make your questions succinct. We don't need lots and lots of, like extra commentary, unless you want to put it in parentheses for me to read, but reading like paragraphs of like a question where the question is actually like right at the top or right at the bottom, and the rest is just kind of like explanation, like commentary on the question. Try to like compact it down. Just get to the point, if you please. And like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And now I go like wind on prairie.